So how are you, family? Hope you are good. Today we have bring a amazing video. If you like this, then please like and subscribe, as your one subscribe means a lot to us. So without any delay, we will start the story. Blue crystal fire tore through the air. One hit would erase him. Izuku Midoriya barely had time to breathe as his mount, Torrent, skidded sideways across the flooded ruins. The dragon above screamed, its colossal wings blotting out the sky as glintstone breath rained down like a sorcerer's execution. "This isn't Limgrave," Izuku muttered, panic hidden behind his helmet. Unlike the dragon he'd slain before, this beast weaponized magic itself, compressed blue crystals blasting from its jaws, shredding stone and water alike. Glintstone sorcery. The same power Izuku had once relied on, now aimed straight at his life. "Charge!" he shouted. Torrent obeyed instantly. Gripping the reins with one hand, Izuku raised his massive Zweihander, All-Strike, a blade far heavier than he'd ever imagined wielding when he first bought it from a wandering merchant on the Weeping Peninsula. He had struggled with it once. Not anymore. The dragon descended. Water exploded outward as its claws struck the ground, its roar daring Izuku to come closer. The air vibrated with killing intent as blue light gathered again in its throat. Izuku didn't slow down. At the last possible second, he swerved past the compressed glintstone beam, death passing inches from his shoulder. Then he leapt. Torrent dissolved into shimmering blue motes beneath him as Izuku soared upward, wind screaming past his ears. For a heartbeat, time froze. The dragon's eyes widened. Glintstone still poured from its jaws as Izuku raised All-Strike high above his head. "Now!" The blade crashed down. Steel met skull with a thunderous impact that echoed across the cursed land, the sound of defiance ringing louder than the dragon's roar. The great dragon attempted to turn its head, but its movement proved sluggish, allowing the blade to pierce its blue eye. A resounding roar filled the air as the dragon's head arched back, dragging Izuku along as he clung to the hilt of his weapon for dear life. Gritting his teeth, Izuku seized the dragon's scaly face, hauling himself up and driving the blade deeper into the creature's skull. With a mighty yell, he plunged the blade further, mercilessly impaling the monster's brain. As the dragon convulsed in its death throes, it made one final attempt to strike its nimble adversary, only to collapse lifelessly into the shallow lake below. Breathing heavily, Izuku let out a sigh of relief and accomplishment, swiftly extracting the massive blade from the dragon's eye socket. Lowering himself to the ground, he landed in the cold water which seeped into his armor. A chuckle escaped him, quickly transforming into uproarious laughter. I did it! Again!" Izuku gazed at the enormous corpse with mixed feelings. He despised taking the life of any living being, but in this land, everything sought to kill him without hesitation, save for a few others who were kinda friendly. Raising his gaze to the sky, where the towering figure of the Erd tree loomed over the lands between, Izuku let out a melancholic whimper. "How long has it been since I arrived here?" Izuku reminisced about the time when he was still a naive child, clinging to false hope back in Japan. His eyes focused intently on the colossal Erd tree, its golden glow an awe-inspiring sight. Initially, when Izuku had arrived in the abandoned chapel on the secluded island, he believed it was all a dream. But when he opened the door and caught sight of the massive Erd tree, his perspective shifted. So let's dive into the main story.
It was mesmerizing, to say the least. Never before had Izuku witnessed such beauty and grandeur. Yet, it also stirred new emotions within him, dread and fear. His first death at the hands of the Grafted Scion, as the Round Table Hold members called them, was an experience he would never forget. He wanted nothing more than to curl into a ball and weep, and that's precisely what he did after awakening in a damp cave. "I still don't understand. Me, an Elden Lord." Izuku closed his eyes, his gaze now fixed on the lifeless dragon. "But if I want to return, I have to continue. No matter how long it takes." Rising from his seated position, Izuku slowly approached the dragon's corpse, preparing to extract its heart. "And to do that, I need power." Izuku pierced through the chest of the dragon's corpse, blood gushing out like a fountain as he repeatedly carved a hole into its body. A few more repetitive stabs and there he saw his goal. Thrusting his arm into the gaping wound, Izuku groaned as he pried the heart out of the dragon's dead body. Examining the bloody dragon heart in his hands, a wide grin spread across his face. He tucked it into his satchel, alongside his other belongings, before setting out to find his main objective. The key to the Academy seal should be somewhere nearby, according to the map. Izuku mumbled, his old habits still lingering. After a short search, he located the key, along with some other items that he stowed away in his satchel. As he did so, he felt an unfamiliar force tugging at his being. Alert and on guard, Izuku turned around, Zweihander at the ready, prepared for another enemy seeking to prematurely end his fragile existence. However, reality defied his expectations. A colossal black portal emerged, drawing in the remains of the slain dragon and generating a powerful suction that pulled Izuku toward it. Refusing to meet his demise once again, Izuku summoned Torrent, only to see his spectral steed hurtling into the gaping maw of the portal. Swiftly dismissing Torrent, Izuku desperately searched for something to grab hold of, determined not to be consumed by the portal's force. Yet, before he could secure his grip, the vacuum's strength intensified, sweeping him off his feet and hurtling him into the massive portal. "I hate this place." Izuku's screams and yells faded into bleak silence as his body was completely engulfed by the portal, leaving no trace of the fierce battle that had taken place moments before. "Die you fuckers," Katsuki Bakugo growled, his arm thrust forward letting loose a giant blast against those pesky villains. Their bodies flew away as the blast connected, their groans and whimpers lost within the burning battlefield. "Yo, Bakubro." Katsuki turned to his right to see a redhead beating down another villain with his bare hands, the villain's face bruised and bloody, but otherwise glaring at the redhead with undisguised hate. "We need to get out of here. The rest might need our help." "The hell you think I'm trying to do, shitty hair?" Katsuki sidestepped left and dodged some kind of slithering tentacle with a blade attached on its end. "These fucking villains ain't giving me an opening. Drop dead assholes." Katsuki roared and brought his hands together and created the mother of all blasts, practically sending another villain into a wall. Flesh and concrete met in an epic showdown, only for concrete to give in and crumble like glass. The villain who was hurled into it didn't get up. "Shitty hair. Made an exit." Katsuki yelled towards his teammate and vaulted for the newly made doorway, but before he could reach it, another villain stepped in front of him with his giant frame. "Damned kids. What the hell is Ua feeding ya?" The villain roared and gulped down a bottle of soda. It took at most a second and let loose an ear-piercing burp, the sound waves originating from it decimating the nearby surroundings as the walls and floors above crumbled from the force. Katsuki gritted his teeth but didn't instinctively cover his ears and instead threw another explosion at the burping villain. It slightly phased him, and the villain glared at Katsuki, hands bringing his bottle of soda back to his lips. It was at that moment the redhead threw an uppercut at the villain's hand, the bottle of soda flying into the air and dripping its contents all over the burning and crumbling building. "You brat!" The villain roared and reached for the redhead, only for Katsuki to launch a knee at the villain's groin. His screams reached a higher pitch as his hands tried to rub at his prized jewels. He didn't last much longer as Katsuki stomped on the villain's head multiple times just to get the villain knocked out. Once he was sure that the villain was completely out of the fight, Katsuki let out a sigh of relief and looked around the burning building. 6 villains, 4 males and 2 females, all adults. And all of them sucked ass. "Shit, the fuck are villains trying to do here?" Katsuki grumbled while heading out of the building via the wall he made earlier. "I don't know man, but we need to help the others." The redhead grinned with his spiky teeth on full display. "But damn, Bakubro, you totally destroyed the villains. They were fucking weak." Katsuki narrowed his gaze at the fallen villains. If this is what the villains are capable of, Aizawa and the rest would mop the fucking floor with them. If that fucking warp gate didn't. "Yo dude, that was our bad." Redhead rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. "We shouldn't have done that, but we need to go and help the others out." Fine. Katsuki sighed and ran for the streets. Where the hell is the fucking exit, anyway? Tsuyu was not having a good day. First that purple midget kept on leering at her. Mina kept on teasing her about her love life, or the non-existence of it. And now she was fighting for dear life against villains that invaded their school. Tsuyu launched her tongue towards the face of the villain while he tried to choke her underwater. The villain reeled back as his breathing mask fell off and the loss of oxygen prompted him to let go. She felt his grip slacken and Suyu kicked him off. She didn't stop to see if the villain continued sinking or if he was able to get his mask back. She needed to get out of here. Never in her life had she praised her quirk as much as now, with villains occupying this giant artificial lake looking for her or her friends to kill. As she swam through the surprisingly clean water, she managed to spot another figure trying to swim up. Squinting her eyes, she saw one of her classmates slowly weaken as she ran out of breath. And another villain showed up, snagging the legs of her classmate. She knew she wouldn't survive, so Suyu had to act fast. Heart beating faster, Suyu swam faster and harder than she ever did in her life. Her classmate's life depended on it. Legs tensed and coiled, Suyu launched a well-timed kick against the villain with a shark head, causing him to groan and let go of her classmate. Quickly grabbing the form of the drowning girl, Suyu quickly swam up and saw a giant thing floating above water. A boat. A grin floated on her face as she broke through the surface of the water and tossed the body of her classmate onto the deck. Using her quirk, she stuck to the walls of the boat and swiftly made her way onto the deck as well. The first thing that she saw was her classmate with brown hair and a permanent blush on her cheeks, gasping for air and vomiting the water she swallowed. Beside her was another figure, and her mood dropped. Asui, help. The purple midget looked like he had soiled his diaper, literally, as he cried like a baby. She was about to help the brunette get rid of the unsafe water within her, but then a black portal appeared behind both the brunette and the purple midget. The purple midget cried even more and ran as far as possible from the black portal, while the brunette was still heaving out the water. All the while Suyu was dreading another deadly encounter. Yes, Suyu wasn't having a good day at all. Izuku was furious. The 10 months living. No, surviving the lands between wasn't something a normal person would be able to go through without substantial changes. After all, humans are nothing if not adaptable. However, it didn't mean he did not loathe every second of traversing those dangerous paths. He remembered that stupid commoner-looking guy who transformed into a giant bear, Rune Bears, if he recalled correctly, and had him for lunch because he was too stupefied to call Torrent. If not for the guidance of Grace, then Izuku's story would have ended there. But that's not all. While traversing Limgrave's very own Agil Lake in search of more weapons and armor to take down Margit, he came across a tiny patch of land with worshipping. Izuku didn't know what to call them. And as if Murphy decided today was not his day, a fire-breathing dragon came flying out of nowhere and obliterated a bunch of them. Of course, being the sensible teen he was, Izuku hoofed it out of there with Torrent and then came across a basement-like structure with a chest inside. Surprise surprise, Murphy wasn't done dealing him shit yet, and once more, he was fucked in the ass. It took him a few blinks before he realized he was in some kind of mine with a bunch of old-looking people that had stone-like skin mining crystals with their sorcery. And then those dreaded cockroach things. Oh, how he hated them with a passion. Luckily, he was able to escape the damned mines, despite repeatedly being locked inside after each death. He swore he would come back and get his revenge. And so what if it isn't hero-like? Try saying that after getting punctured to death for the 11th time in a row when all you wanted to do was get the fuck out. Izuku sighed, drifting about in this void for who knew how long was getting to him. The last thing he remembered was defeating the second flying dragon he encountered during his journey across the lands between and getting sucked into a giant black portal. He still didn't know what the portal was, but if this what was inside, then he'd rather stake himself in the heart right now and hopefully wake up in the last site of grace he'd frequented. He'd wait for another hour. That is if he could even notice time pass while floating in this damnable void. Izuku was done waiting. He's been floating in this pit-black void for who knows how long already. Every time he wanted to schlunk all strike down his chest, he thought to wait for another hour, and every time after that. It kept on delaying to another hour, until he was just done with waiting and decided to take action. Grabbing all strike from his back, Izuku positioned the blade point right over his chest. Just when he was about to plunge it down mercilessly, a tiny bright light on the horizon surprised him, letting his grip around the blade slacken. His other hand quickly made for a break for the blade before it drifted into the nothingness. As he grabbed the blade, the light continued to grow, and grow, and grow, until finally, most of the inky black void was nothing but an afterthought. Here, surrounded by blinding, white light, Izuku couldn't help but marvel at the grandiose of the radiance. It felt warm, comforting, like it tore down the semblance of chaos budding deep within and sprung up order in its stead. A smile graced his lips as Izuku embraced the light, encompassing him in its brilliance. And just as the brilliance arrived like a comet, so too did it leave like father on his way to pick up milk. Snapping his eyes shut as the brilliance was too much for him, Izuku gasped when he felt the warmth and comfort vanish and turn into scorching heat. Opening his eyes, he saw only flame. Flame and burning bricks. Where am I? Izuku's legs twitched, and it was then that he finally noticed that he was standing on solid ground, no longer floating in the seemingly unending void. What? Oi! Any one of you guys know this prick? Izuku did a double take. Did he just hear? Fuck if I know. You, big guy, notice any of us in fucking armor of all things when we got sent through? Yes, he was hearing it. His mother tongue. Nope. That means he's one of the brats. Kill him. Japanese. If he was doubting his ear earlier, then he wasn't now. Wait, did he just say kill him? Snapping his head to the side, Izuku saw an incoming bile of green goo hurtling at him like a missile. Not that it was as fast as a missile, or any arrow that flew at him back in Stormvale Castle. Frankly, he'd seen those dragons hurl fireballs faster than that slow-moving projectile, glintstone sorcery in the case of the latest dragon he'd slain. Simply sidestepping to the side was enough to dodge the blob of green goo, but when it impacted the asphalt just behind him, he heard sizzling. Taking a glance behind him, while also making sure that none of the aggressors could take advantage of his momentary lapse in awareness, Izuku's eyes widened when saw the asphalt burn and dissolve due to the blob of green goo, now obviously seen as acid. Glancing back at the trio of attackers, he narrowed his eyes. Reminisce later, fight now. Grabbing all strike that was, miraculously, lodged into the asphalt nearby, Izuku took a stance. Observing the body language of the trio before him, Izuku noticed that some of them were trembling slightly. Nervousness, maybe. Not that it mattered. All that mattered was that they wanted to kill him, so he was going to defend himself. Rushing forward, he noticed that the three of them had their eyes wide when he suddenly appeared before them. Swinging his sword from right to left, his blade tore through meat and flesh. Bones broke and organs ruptured as two of the attackers were bisected through the waist and came tumbling to the ground in heaps of gore. Fuck. The last of his attackers, one who was fortunately saved by the skin of his teeth because he was able to move at the last second, threw a wide-eyed glance at the corpses beneath Izuku's feet. Meanwhile, Izuku's mind was racing. What had he done? He didn't mean to do this. They were weak. As soft as tissue. Paper. None of the enemies he's faced in the lands between died in a single hit from all strike. And said weapon was reinforced with smithing stones that all of his runes could afford. Stepping back, he didn't realize that the last attacker just up and left, screaming all the while about a monster in human skin that killed his buddies. The hypocrite. But he wasn't wrong. Izuku was a monster. He's killed a lot, even if he didn't want to. Sentient beings too, even if they looked far from a human. Those shambling corpse lookalikes that wandered around Limgrave, or those foot soldiers that guarded Stormvale Castle. He'd killed them all, just for the mistake of standing against him during his journey to become Elden Lord. To right all the wrongs and fix the land between, returning it to its former glory. At least, that's what he was told to believe. He didn't know why he was doing so. Maybe out of a purpose born out of desperation. Because he couldn't be a hero in Japan, so become a hero somewhere else. He didn't know. Even with the last 10 months to reflect on himself, he was still struggling in the dark, his purpose waning and flickering every other day. At least Melina was there to cheer him up whenever he was feeling down. Wait, Melina. Izuku couldn't help but voice out her name. He looked all around him, not giving attention to the corpses beneath his feet. Maybe she could give him a reason as to why he's here and not in the lands between. He stood there, silent as the grave as he kept on looking for a site of grace he could rest on. To speak to the girl who he owed his life to. Seeing that there were no sites of grace to be found nearby, Izuku took a step forward and into the blazing inferno of the burning buildings. All to find a site of grace where he could hear her comforting voice. Dude, what the hell? Katsuki had to scrunch up his nose in silence when he came across the poor bastards rotting away on the ground, away from the flickering flames of the burning buildings. Looking to his side, he saw Ajiro already heaving out his breakfast on the ground. Quote, Shit, shitty hair, we're not alone. Keep an eye out. Katsuki knew he was an ass. But even then, he knew when to tone it down when something like this happens. Something like when Deku saved him. He shook his head. Mourn later, survive now. Even months later, he was still grieving the loss of his only friend. The friend he pushed away day by day because of his idiotic ass. Even just remembering the face of his long-buried friend caused his heart to ache. But no, reminisce later, survive now. His mother would kill him a second time if he came home in a body bag like Deku did. Bakubro. Who would do this? Ajiro pointed at the bisected halves of two villains just laying on the ground. Eyes distant as they stared at the void. I know they're villains, but I know, shitty hair. Nobody deserves to go out like that. Katsuki was once again reminded of how Deku died back then. Just looking at the two was giving him flashbacks. Come on, let's keep moving. Ajiro just nodded and followed along, taking uneasy glances at the two corpses as they went farther and farther. Not here either. Where is it? Izuku was fully ready to bring down the buildings around him in a fit of rage. Maybe then he could finally win sight and have his questions answered. But no, all he saw were fire, and more fire. Even wearing his armor, the one he pried off a one unlucky horseback riding vagabond with their furry collars, was starting to get a bit hard to breathe in. His skin was boiling at this point, his sweat evaporating the moment it left the pores. It wasn't long until he stumbled upon a fire exit door, which confused him to no end. Looking at the burning buildings behind him, one that could pass for a small town, then back at the door, he couldn't help but scratch the back of his helmet. At least the door answered one of his questions. He wasn't in the lands between. He was skeptical at first, back when those three spoke Japanese, but a fire exit door, with both English and Japanese written on the red painted metal. It was all the proof needed. Still didn't know what use a fire exit door is when an entire town of buildings is burning right behind him, but semantics. That said though, he didn't notice the entire town was domed in. It was hard to see it because of all the fire and smoke, but now that he was at the edge of the dome, he could see it clearly. Not delaying any further, he gripped the door handle and twisted it open. Stepping through the doorway, Izuku's eyes widened once more when he saw what was on the other side. A giant pool of water with a yacht. Yes, a yacht floating above it. Giant mountains that looked artificial. A landslide that looked like a glacier had landed on top of it. Some more mini domes scattered around, and a giant plaza right at the center. And of course, there was another dome that encompassed all of the areas he'd listed. But that's beside the point. What was worrying was the fight occurring in the plaza. A bunch of people, ranging from human-looking to downright strange humanoid creatures, were fighting a guy fully dressed in black with a white scarf and yellow goggles. Not his problem. If there was one thing that the lands between taught Izuku, it was that going headlong into a fight without regard to one's safety was a death sentence. But he was Izuku, and damn him if he isn't trying to be a hero every now and then. And so, with a heavy heart and his steel ready to sing, he put Melina on the backburner for now and approached the chaotic battlefield. Albeit he'll tone down his strength for this. He wouldn't want to kill any more of them if he could help it. Shota was beginning to think that his teaching habits were coming back to bite him in the ass. He launched his capture scarf at one of the charging villains, noting the man having a mutation quirk due to having scales on his arms and a larger than average body. The durable scarf wrapped around the villain's arm and Shota gave it a good pull, not that it did much because of the strength gap between the two. But it was enough to change the trajectory of his punch. Shota's goggles narrowly avoided the scaly fist that flew past him. He took the moment of opportunity to kick the villain's groin with his steel-tipped boots. The villain roared in pain, his growly voice raising an octave higher, and Shota delivered the coup de grace, a roundhouse kick to the temple. The villain dropped like a sack of potatoes. The weakness of all males alike, the balls. Shota always liked hitting them where it hurts. Plus, less chance of the idiots conceiving and leaving more kids to fend for themselves, only to end up as minor villains when they grow up because of bad parenting. In any case, one villain down, dozens more to go. What was he thinking when he jumped into the fray alone with no backup whatsoever? Oh right, his students. He really hoped that 13 was able to get them out of here before that misty-looking villain he assumed was the teleporter got to them. He just blinked for a moment, and the next, he was gone. A grave mistake on his part. Eye twitching, he tilted his head to the side, dodging a sharpened rock flung at him. Quickly directing his gaze towards the offender, said villain went wide-eyed when they couldn't launch any more projectiles with their quirk. Throwing his capture scarf at them, it wrapped itself around their neck and Shota tugged at the scarf, hard. The villain was sent flying towards him, screaming all the while. Shota may not be as strong as any other hero with strength-augmenting quirks, but even he had a good physique underneath all that baggy clothing. Clotheslining the villain, their body crashed into the ground, unconscious before they could even utter a single groan. Another one down, still dozens more to go. His eyes were already beginning to burn, the familiar, maddening itch intensifying. Every blink sent a wave of irritation through him, but he couldn't afford to close his eyes for more than a fraction of a second. Of all the demerits of using his quirk, it just had to put a very annoying, yet very deadly problem. A single blink was enough for a villain to turn the tables against him. That is, if the villain in question weren't total pushovers, which these villains seemed to be. All they had on their side were numbers. Quality wasn't a given, so why stage an invasion against a school meant to teach heroes with such lackluster villains? Time passed in a blur, and as it did, more bodies began to litter the ground, all unconscious. 3, 7, 12. More and more villains dropped to the ground, and the wave of villains was lessening somewhat. But he was getting tired, and he sorely wanted to scratch the ever-living fuck out of his eyeballs. His instincts blared at him to dodge to the right, and when has he ever doubted his senses? Lunging to the side, his feet skidded across the ground as he glared at the villain who had a literal hand as a mask, covering most of his face. The only defining traits he had were his light blue-colored hair and thin as twig stick body. 23 seconds, the villain uttered, and Shota's fast-beating heart quickened some more. That's how long you can keep your eyes open, Eraserhead. Shit, he forgot to keep tabs on their leader. Speaking of which, where was that mist-like villain now? He hadn't seen him for a minute or so, and with the chaos unfolding around him, he wasn't able to check back up with the rest of the class. Not that it matters. The head villain stood straight up, and the remaining villains that were broken and bruised quietly stepped to the side. Your quirk evens out the game, but against true strength. Out of the corner of his eyes, Shota managed to spot a black blur rushing at him with terrifying speeds. Using his quirk again, he glared at the being, but the blur continued unimpeded. He pushed his body to its limits, leg pumping as much force as he could just to dodge whatever that thing was, but to no avail. A single punch to the face left him broken, his body careening through the air like paper doll. His momentum was stopped, however, when the same black blur caught him in the air, before smashing him onto the ground with so much force, it broke the concrete. At that point, Aizawa was done. His bones were screaming and his muscles crying. The air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat, and every breath he took felt like inhaling shards of glass and needles. One tapped like a scrub, "Hey, you are nothing, Aizawa." Despite the agony coursing through his body, Shota's eyes remained defiantly open. He refused to succumb to the darkness, his thoughts a stubborn tether to the world of the living, his will aflame and heart ablaze. To not taste the bitter end. Meet the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace, Nomu. The villain looked down on him, and if Shota squinted, he could barely make out a small trace of a grin on his lips. Now where the hell is the main player? Even if he wanted to speak, Shota couldn't. He was in too much pain to even think about moving his jaw. Not talking. The villain's face grew closer and the sterilized smell of the amputated hand gripping onto his face was nauseating. The malicious grin was all too clear now, and it took too much just to even hold his eyes open. Oh well, let's see if heroes can respawn. This was it. Shota was always prepared to die in this line of work, but for it to happen here, of all places. His students, for all their faults during the first day and the following days, had potential. Yes, even that bald-headed midget Minoru, otherwise, he would have transferred him to the general course on the first day. It was a shame he wouldn't be there to cultivate them in their next sessions. Hopefully, They would have gotten out of here by now, but if not, he'd kill them a second time in the afterlife. Hazashi. Poor bastard. First Oboro, now him. Hazashi's not going to be happy. Closing his eyes, Shota awaited his final end. For a long, few seconds that felt like an eternity, he waited. And waited, and waited, until he could wait no more and slowly opened his eyes. Through the haze of pain and agony, Shota's eyes focused on a glint of metal, a towering figure wielding a massive blade. Like judgment from the very heavens above, the figure slashed his blade down, towards the unmoving Nomu. Izuku made it just in time to save whoever that was behind him. Just taking a quick peek at the downed figure made him wince. There were a bunch of times back in the lands between that he'd been in the same position as him. Every time that happened, all that awaited him was death. But even with his broken and mangled body, the man he protected glared defiantly until the end. Even accepted his death with nary a complaint. That was a true warrior, right there. His blade slashing down towards the black, giant musclehead, Izuku's eyes widened when the blade just sunk inches into its flesh, and not even a grunt of pain came from the monster. Body tense, Izuku withdrew his blade and backpedaled, eyes never leaving the towering figure of the monster before him. Now who the fuck is this NPC? A man with a dismembered hand for a mask gestured towards him with an evident scowl. Izuku couldn't help but tilt his head at the sight, but otherwise, it wasn't the weirdest thing he'd seen in his short life. Izuku didn't dare talk, as uttering even a single word is costly within the heat of battle. Every bit of focus must be directed towards the enemy before him, or even those behind him. Such is the life of a Tarnished vying for the throne of Elden Lord. Seeing that Izuku didn't speak, the man sighed and waved his arm around. Not like it matters. Nomu, get rid of him. The moment the monster moved, Izuku had to pull out all the stops just to even dodge a single punch from the towering monstrosity. His metal boots skidded across the ground as he desperately tried to put a stop to his momentum. Huh, able to dodge that. Is this a mini-boss? Now the man was spewing out nonsense, but the monster didn't give him any quarter. The more the monster rushed at him, the more Izuku had to expend his energy to try not to get hit. Definitely a mini-boss. The man's voice continued to strain on his ears. Quite annoying, actually, treating him like some kind of obstacle to be overcome. But the records didn't mention any of this. Shigaraki Tamura. Izuku's eyes widened when a familiar-looking black portal appeared in thin air. What confused him even more was that it was talking. Apologies, but a student was able to get away. The heroes will be here at any moment. Izuku, still stunned at the sudden appearance of the portal, was slugged in the chest by the monster by taking advantage of his inaction. He was flung through the air like a ragdoll but was able to control his fall and tuck into a roll, negating some of the damage. Kneeling on the ground, Izuku had to quickly move to the right to dodge another punch from the monster that was still rushing at him like a pouncing predator. Its huge fist met concrete, and a loud boom echoed through the area. Debris flew outward as a cloud of dust billowed outward from the point of impact, and Izuku had to squint his eyes as some of the dust managed to get through the eye holes of his helmet. Not that it was that much of a problem. He'd had worse. If you weren't our ticket out of here, I'd have turned you to dust. It was at that moment that Izuku found himself right in front of the handy man and portal. Man, and the mini-boss is still alive, great. Nomu. Izuku had enough of this bullshit. He normally disliked using this aspect of power within him because it made him feel out of control and bloodthirsty, but now wasn't the time to second-guess himself. The seal on his left hand, usually hidden, glowed bright red, and in place of his left arm, a giant, scaly, clawed appendage emerged. A brief silence overtook the area, and taking that as his cue, Izuku swung the dragon's claw towards the rushing Nomu. Sharp claws met black flesh, and the Nomu fell. Flesh and muscle ripped and tore, revealing the bones and organs underneath. However, the Nomu never uttered a sound as the giant claw tore through it like paper. Huh, would you look at that? The handy man focused his eyes on Izuku. Didn't think Nomu would have been damaged that much by a mini-boss. Sensing his nonchalance, Izuku felt his heart beat faster. Wasn't he afraid? Why wasn't he afraid? Is there something he was missing? His ears caught something. It sounded like bubbles. Bubbles bubbling, for the lack of a better term. Glancing towards the source of the sound, Izuku had to pick up his jaw from meeting the ground. The Nomu was regenerating, and quickly, at that. This was the first time Izuku had seen a living creature regenerate after being bifurcated from shoulder to waist. He was certain he hadn't missed the monster's heart, an organ most beings need to survive. Izuku might have drawn his sword before the duel when he assumed the monster only had super strength, super speed being a component of super strength because of the force involved. What's the matter? Can't stand up against Nomu. The handyman cackled as he gloated like a madman. Super strength isn't just his quirk. He also has regeneration. Now this was news to him. Last he heard from research studies from quirk analysts before he got sent to the lands between, a person couldn't hold 2 or more quirks because of incompatibilities. Sure, there were instances of some people dual quirks or even multifaceted quirks, but they mostly stem from the same source. It wasn't impossible for someone to have both super strength and regeneration, but the handyman mentioned a second quirk. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility that the monster had more than 2 quirks. What if super strength and regeneration weren't just its quirks? What if it was tacked on with even more quirks? That was a scenario he dreaded to picture. Just imagining the mind-boggling amount of human experimentation one must have done to create such a being was horrifying. The less said about the victims, the better. Izuku gripped All Strike's handle tighter and hefted it over his shoulder. Spine straight and legs tensed, Izuku looked at the regenerating monster, combing all over its body in search of a weakness. Admittedly, Izuku was a bit of a dunce for not realizing it sooner. Its brain was exposed. Something he didn't notice when they were locked in melee combat. It was time to rectify that. Oh, Mini-Boss is still trying to fight the Nomu. It's useless. Useless. Handyman continued cackling like his weaponized monster was invincible, but if there was one thing Izuku was sure of, is that invincibility did not exist. He's killed Godric, the Grafted. A demigod. This monster in front of him was but an ant against that horrible experience. Calling upon his dragon incantation once more, his left hand transformed into that of a dragon's claw. He charged towards the regenerating monster, already having attached itself together and mending its wounds. Its beady eyes glared lifelessly at him, and it roared. Its shriek was loud enough, it managed to ring inside Izuku's ears, but it didn't stop his frontal assault. He brought his dragon claw up, and the monster stood defiantly against the enlarged appendage. It prepared to catch the falling dragonclaw, but here the monster made a mistake. Izuku had another weapon in hand. All Strike sliced upwards, amputating one of its arms. Blood leaked out of the wound, but the monster paid in no mind. It began bubbling again, muscles beginning to take shape of a muscled, black arm. But it was too late. With only a single arm meeting against the dragon claw, its defenses broke, and the sharp claws tore through its body again. This time, it went through both of its shoulders and the middle of its head. The monster split into 4 parts, blood and gore gushing out of the fatal wounds. Brain matter splattered on the ground, and for once, the handyman was silent as he witnessed the death of his weapon. All was silent for a moment, and Izuku stared at the gored corpse, waiting for the time it regenerated again. It didn't. No. What the fuck? I call hacks. Cheater. Handyman started raving like a lunatic, his bright, red eyes glaring directly at Izuku. Nomu had shock absorption. It was supposed to beat All Might. How the fuck did you kill it? Izuku didn't deign to give him the time of day, instead, focusing on the man with his murderous gaze. Taking a step forward, he catapulted himself towards the handyman, Zweihander poised to stab through his torso. If not for a portal that consumed him, he would have been skewered like an animal. Shigaraki Tamura, perhaps we should retreat for now. The portal talked. It actually talked. At least Izuku had a name to put to the handyman. The Nomu is dead, and our plans are in shambles. We need to leave. No, not until I kill that fucking mini-boss. Tamura growled and launched himself towards Izuku like a speeding bullet, hands posed to grapple. For a lanky man that lacked muscles, he was deceptively fast. Not as fast as the Nomu, however. Izuku stepped to the side, evading the grab, but Tamura was able to change his direction in an instant. Not that it stopped Izuku from trying to impale the man on his blade, but the portal once again stopped him by doing so. All Strike pierced through a black, misty portal, and he felt something stabbing him through the back. Eyes widening, Izuku had to withhold a gasp as he felt his back and insides burn. Blood leaked from his mouth, and he was too stunned to move, but Tamura didn't care. His hands grabbed onto his armor and Izuku had to wince when he felt his armor dissolve and rust. Finally getting out of his stupor, Izuku launched a kick towards the midsection of Tamura, who ate it all and was sent flying. Pulling his sword from the portal, he felt the blade in his back slide out and dropped to a knee. Izuku didn't expect that to happen, and now he was paying the price. His own sword, stabbing him through the back thanks to that portal that connected two different spaces like a bridge. And now his armor was decaying and dissolving, revealing the clothes he wore underneath. This was very bad. He needed to regroup. Calling upon Torrent, his trusty steed appeared before him in sparkling blue motes. What the fuck? He has a goddamn phase too. Tamura growled, but Izuku didn't pay him any mind. Mounting his steed, he quickly put distance between the two as he grabbed the flask of crimson tears within his pack. Gulping down a portion of it, he felt his back forcefully knitting itself into shape, mending the damages done by his trusty blade. Even his organs that ruptured were quickly patching itself back up to a healthier state. And he can fucking heal. Fuck this mini-boss. At this point, Tamura was frothing at the mouth at the blatant bullshit Izuku was pulling out of his bag of tricks. Enraged to the point of being completely incensed, Tamura howled as he chased after the vagabond knight-looking Izuku galloping away as he continued gulping down those precious crimson tears. Izuku couldn't help but snort at the amusing scene. Here was a raving lunatic chasing after him, raging about how unfair he was, like this was some sort of game. His smirk changed to a frown and his eyes glared at the chasing Tamura. A game. This scenario. This situation. A game. One of their victims, the one dressed in all black with that curious-looking scarf, was looking like he'd be next in line to enter the tree without a physical body. And this man chasing him thinks this whole thing was a game. Izuku's eyes twitched. Steering Torrent to make a 180, Izuku readied his blade and whipped the reins in his other hand, spurring Torrent into a gallop. All Strike's tip scratched along the ground with scent flying from the friction it caused. Its ear-grating sound something of an old friend for Izuku, seeing that he'd always do this against those pesky soldiers of Godric shambling about Limgrave, even if he didn't want to, but hey, they were trying to kill him every time they see him. This didn't deter Tamura, however. The mad howling coming from the man with a hand as a mask annoyed Izuku greatly. As the two neared each other, Izuku began the motions for an upward swing while Tamura prepared to dodge the attack. 6 meters, 5 meters, 4 meters, 2. Izuku swung up and Tamura kicked the ground, his form flying into the air with his hands stretched out and palms open. Izuku's eyes widened and realized that his sword was still in mid-swing, making it near impossible to change its trajectory. Tamura's hands grabbed onto Izuku's armor, and the man hung onto dear life. Meanwhile, Izuku was growling as he felt his armor crumble into dust, and he knew that if this kept up, his flesh would be next. Growling, Izuku let go of Torrent's reins and grabbed the lanky man's hair, nearly pulling it at the roots. Tamura yelped, but he didn't let go. Izuku's armor continued to deteriorate, and he knew this couldn't continue. Once more transforming his left hand into a dragon claw, Tamura's eyes widened when the sharp claws began gripping at his skull. His grip momentarily loosening, Izuku grasped his opportunity and flung Tamura up into the air, then quickly readjusted his sword to pierce through his soft flesh. Izuku may detest taking lives, but even he knew when to draw the line. All Strike stabbed through Tamura's torso and the lanky man coughed up blood as he dangled midair, propped up by the sturdy blade of All Strike. Waving it around, Izuku swung down, and Tamura was swiftly tossed to the ground, but before he could impact the hard concrete, another portal appeared underneath him and cradled him to safety. Shigaraki Tamura, we must retreat. We cannot risk your death. The misty portal's voice sounded a bit desperate in Izuku's ears, but that was enough confirmation that what he did left some grievous damage. All Tamura could do was wheeze and cough up more blood, but his eyes never left Izuku still riding atop his mount. Not giving them the chance to leave, Izuku quickly dismounted Torrent as his trusty steed turned into light blue motes before disappearing and lunged for the two vulnerable foes. His blade was ready to stab down once more, only for a portal to appear before him and Izuku barely managed to stop his sword from going through it again with sheer control. Their chance appearing, The misty portal man made another portal before the two of them went in, the portal closing once they were well inside the mist. The two figures vanished from the spot and only Izuku was left standing in the center, the corpse of the Nomu silently laying on the ground nearby. First time having an enemy run from him, and Izuku decided that it wasn't that bad of a feeling. Sure, sometime down the line, it would probably bite him in the back, but for now, he could relish in the fact that the danger was gone. Now all that was left was to make sure the other black-clad man stayed alive. That said, he didn't know whether his crimson tears could heal him, and he sure as hell didn't know how to heal other people. Maybe the warming stone could do. At least it's better than nothing. Izuku was about to grab said item from his bag but then stopped when he heard something pseudo-explode in the distance. Narrowing his eyes in the sound's direction, he saw a canopy of trees and something smoking coming from the horizon. Tsuyu's day just went from bad to completely worse. Mineta was nearby, some of his fingers shredded and cut from his hand, while Ochako trying not to break out into tears and retch onto the nearby floorboards. Some of the villains decided that waiting was boring and decided to sink the yacht, to which half of the boat was now underwater infested with other villains. Mineta was out of the fight, seeing that his eyes were glazed over but still alive, while Ochako was barely keeping herself awake, even with the wounds she accumulated over time fighting the villains doing hit-and-run tactics. She needed a plan to get out of here, and she needed one fast. A splash of water and Tsuyu had to duck an incoming villain with a shark head that bit air. His body scraped along the yacht's floors, and he righted himself up as he flashed a malicious grin over at her and Ochako. Well, Froggy, you have two choices. The man's grin turned wide before he let out a spine-chilling chuckle. Either die, or you could surrender to us. We promise we won't hurt ya much. Tsuyu's face darkened. The villains were fucking predators. Tsuyu swung around a sturdy-looking pole as she dodged the razor-sharp fin the shark villain used to nearly bisect her in half. Sweat pooled underneath her brows as she felt the wind swept past her, eyes looking everywhere for a method of exit for her and her classmates. Minoru was fortunately ignored by the villains, seeing that he was totally out of it, but if he didn't get medical attention soon, there was a possibility the pervert could die of blood loss. Ochako, meanwhile, was doing her best to stall the other villains that had come on board the sinking ship to have some fun. Bunch of sickos. Come on, Froggy. Don't make this hard. The shark villain grinned and rushed at her once more while her froggy feet skidded across the smooth floor. We'll take care of ya. No need for body bags. Hehehehe. Shivers crawled up her spine as the disgusting chuckle entered her ears. Tsuyu'd rather die than suffer, that. But if she did lose and she was alive to see the results. Tsuyu trembled. She'd rather not think about it. Bending her back near parallel to the floor, she narrowly dodged the razor-sharp fin once more, its blade-like edges mere centimeters from the tip of her nose. Blinking, she tried to get her breathing in order. She may have trained and exercised to prepare for the rigorous curriculum that was the UA standard, but even then, her teen body had limits. No way in hell would she be able to go up against a fully developed man who looked like he'd been bench pressing since the day he could walk with her still developing body. It was just pure genetics. She ducked down a punch from the shark villain and kicked him away, only for the man to stand his ground like a rock while she was launched away before she landed on the smooth floor. Even if her mutation-type quirk gave her enhanced physical abilities, the villain gunning for her also had a mutation-type quirk, so her advantages were null and void. So, no matter how much one tried to deny it, they were well and truly fucked. Literally. Breathing heavily, Tsuyu tried her best to look for any way out, but the more time she spent avoiding the attacks, the more tired she became, leading to mistakes and bad decision-making. Case in point, she saw the shark villain rush her again. Normally, she would have called the villain insane for doing the same thing again for the third time, expecting for a different outcome. But this particular rush had one factor that was in his favor. Tsuyu was getting tired. She dodged once more, narrowly avoiding certain incapacitation, only for a searing pain to tear through her side. She clenched her teeth and palmed the wound with teary eyes, only to feel something wet and hot dripping from her fingers. Looking down, her eyes dilated when she saw the profusely bleeding gash, and the pain intensified. She swallowed down the shriek that crept up her throat while she tried to staunch the flow. Now look what you made me do. The villain sighed, as if what he was doing was something he regretted. The psychopath. It ain't too late to surrender, Froggy. Bleeding out is a lot worse than it looks. Suyu wanted to scream, to cry. It was just their first month in school. She wasn't supposed to be facing villains this early. Looking to the side where Ochako was fighting, her heart stilled when she saw the brunette slam to the ground with another villain holding her down, a vicious grin on his face. Ochako was barely resisting as the villain tore through her clothes, revealing the skin underneath. Suyu wanted to gag. Well, looks like my boys are already starting. The shark villain approached Suyu slowly, his cackles making her heart beat rapidly. Can't let them start without me, Froggy. So why don't you just drop down? The shark zoomed towards her once more and Suyu tried to dodge again, only for her feet to freeze and drop to a knee. Saliva trickled down her lips as she beheld the villain closing in faster. She closed her eyes. Somebody, help. She waited for the incoming blow to knock her down, tears streaming down her cheeks. All she could hear were the rapid footsteps and the rapid beating of her heart. And shuffling metal. What the? Who the foo ga? She heard a loud smack and something collapsing to the ground. Opening her eyes once more, she looked upon a new figure that towered over the prone shark villain, one of his arms bent like a pretzel with bones piercing through flesh. The sight nearly made Suyu retch, if only she didn't pass out at the same time. To be honest, Izuku was a bit pissed at the shark man, or rather, his entire crew, for going after children. Now he might be tooting his own horn here, what with him being a minor himself, but he reasoned that the experience he gained in the lands between made that point moot. Looking down at the frog-looking teenager, Izuku couldn't help but wince at the sight of her bleeding gash. Rummaging through his pack, he quickly took another warming stone. It works on the black-clad man, albeit slowly, and dropped it down, right next to the unconscious teen. That over and done with, he quickly turned towards the other teenager who was getting molested by another creep, this one looking like he had an octopus for a mother. Pumping energy into his legs, Izuku closed the gap and gave the man a kick to his sides. His girlish yelp will forever implant itself into his mind as the octopus-looking man tumbled across the smooth ship floor like a rolling stone. Towering over the brunette with permanent blushes on her face, Izuku couldn't help but pity the poor girl. Her clothes were shredded, skin showing aplenty. If not for her undergarments shielding her modesty, Izuku would have seen the inverse of nirvana. Observing closer, he could spot bruises and cuts littering her exposed skin, with some of them bleeding trickles. There were also some black markings around her neck. Grabbing another warming stone, he had a lot because he relied more on crimson tears rather than consumables. He plopped it down next to the girl and watched the magic happen. Slowly, her wounds began patching itself up, the gashes and tears across her skin slowly closing. Now that the threat on board was kind of a non-factor, the next thing was making sure those in the water don't come up with intent to harm and safely get these unconscious teens to shore. Not like he could do anything against those people surrounding them if they continued staying underwater. As for how he got up here in the first place with the large body of water holding up the sinking yacht, he jumped. Also, Dragon Claw was useful generating enough force to fling him across the artificial lake. That reminds him, there was another one who looked like one of the teenagers he was protecting. He had purple balls for hair, a weird quirk, but quirks in and of itself were weird anyways, and was missing a few fingers. Izuku winced. Losing fingers was not a pleasant feeling. He may have been used to pain and dying all the time, but during the beginning, even a single cut was enough to send him bawling his eyes out, followed by more stabbing or crushing until his consciousness left him. Grabbing another warming stone, he plopped it next to the midget and breathed a sigh of relief that the smaller guy wouldn't be dying of blood loss anytime soon. Can't say the same about his lost digits, but that was preferable to dying. Now, how is he supposed to get these three off the yacht in the first place? His armor was too heavy to even think of swimming, and he was pretty sure he needed air to live, the last time he checked, so no walking at the bottom of the lake. As time passed and the yacht continued sinking even farther, one of the men in the water probably decided that waiting wasn't fun and jumped to scare the shit out of him, only to get the flat side of all strike to the face once his feet touched the floor, immediately knocking him out cold. Also, he was wearing some kind of goggles and breathing apparatus, so it was safe to assume that the man couldn't breathe underwater naturally. Izuku sighed, another one to bring to shore. He might detest these people from the bottom of his heart, but he hated killing even more when there were alternatives. It just didn't sit right with Izuku to ignore the morals he was brought up with in this hero-centric world of his. It was also a reminder that, for all the inhumane feats he had, like his pseudo-immortality, he was still a human at his core. A reminder that he wasn't a monster like those roaming the lands between had been. He was sane, still sane. His mind was his strongest weapon, and he would make sure that it remained sane until he finished his task. Izuku couldn't let it be otherwise. Otherwise, he shivered. He didn't want to forget. That faceless figure that always made sure he was well taken care of. What did she look like? Why couldn't he remember the face of his own mother? A splash of water took him out of his rumination, and he glanced over another one of the men hiding underwater rushing him with his claws out. Thankful for the sudden interruption, Izuku paid it back twofold by ducking the attack, grabbing the man's outstretched arms and yanking him down as he flew overhead, the sudden pull dislocating the man's shoulders as he shrieked like a banshee. Disliking the noise, Izuku brought foot up and stomped on the shrieking man's head just hard enough to not turn it into a mess of gore and knock him unconscious. Sighing, Izuku slowly went to the railings and mused that the water was getting closer now. Maybe it was time to finally act. The three teens were still unconscious, Frogface because of exhaustion, Brunette because of asphyxiation, the black markings being a dead giveaway, and the purple midget because of shock and probably blood loss. He bundled the three together and called upon Torrent. "Hey, buddy, help me with these three, please." Izuku gave his valiant steed a small smile hidden underneath his helmet. The horse neighed and rubbed his forehead across his hands. "Thanks a lot." Placing the three bodies on the saddle and fastening them to Torrent with rope he got from all around Limgrave, Izuku grinned and went for Torrent's underbelly. "Okay, here's the plan." Izuku made sure that his hands weren't too much of a bother for Torrent. "I throw you to the shore and you double jump to break the fall." Torrent neighed and all Izuku could translate from that was, "All right, but if I land on water, I'll buck you." And frankly, Izuku wouldn't take it any other way. "Good boy." Izuku then transformed both of his arms into dragon claws, and with a shout, flung Torrent across the lake. Now wasn't that a sight? A horse with antlers, maybe an elk, still spotty on his steed's race, gliding past the air with the grace of a dancing swan. Once he was close to the shore, Torrent double jumped, like Izuku said he'd do, and trotted along the ground as the flight came to an end. "Good boy, Torrent." Izuku smiled as his steed trotted along the concrete floor while looking at him from afar, waiting. "I'm on my way." Izuku was about to jump, before he looked at the two unconscious people that were still on deck with him, and they had a prominent feature which they both shared. They had breathing masks, which he destroyed. So, he was sure that if the yacht sunk with them, there was a chance of the two of them drowning if their friends still underwater didn't help them. Or if they even had friends left waiting for them. Well, Izuku was no monster, so enemy or not, he will save them. At least, until they decided to kill him again, in which he'll kill them next. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, it's not happening a third time. As the wind swept past Izuku while he flew through the air, he made sure the bodies strapped to him wouldn't fall to their deaths. He couldn't help but reminisce about the time he spent fighting in the lands between compared to the enemies he faced in Japan. It was surreal. He still remembered his dream of wanting to become a hero back when he was still young with an arrogant, but still normal Katsuki. The time when the two would play heroes as they vowed to be partners when they grew up. They drifted apart when he found out Izuku was quirkless, and society deemed him a social outcast. Come to think of it, it wasn't just his fault Katsuki became the way he was the last time he saw him. They fed him the concept that quirkless were lesser than their quirked counterparts. The more he thought back to it, the more it made sense. Hell, it all started back when they were in kindergarten. Kindergarten. They would be no older than 6 years old at that point, and every adult knew that a child's mind was as malleable as clay. And as they continued drip-feeding him those discriminatory thoughts all the way into his teenage years, he grew worse and worse until the moment where he thought that discriminating quirkless people was the norm. It was fucked up. So yes, Katsuki didn't shoulder all the blame. Was he blameless in the entire fiasco that was his hellish life? No. In fact, he held the topmost seat of Izuku's most hated. It was funny. Izuku only realized that Katsuki was never his friend the moment those parasites managed to get in his head when he died. Chuckling morosely, Izuku wondered if Katsuki ever got into UA. If they did a background check, they either would have found the skeletons in his closet, to which Izuku would be happy to have the blonde Pomeranian placed inside a mental ward or get therapy until he could get over himself, or they would have found nothing. Izuku couldn't put it past the teachers and the principal of that school to sweep under the rug the harassment and borderline criminal acts. Suicide baiting was not to be taken lightly, to present their model student to the hero seen with roses and diamonds. They have, after all, the book on meta-liberation in their curriculum. Idiots, the lot of them. The idea behind the ideology was wonderful, quirks being used to help society or better one's life without restriction, but not all people have equal quirks. Some are blessed with extremely powerful quirks, like for example, Number 13's black holes, while others were gifted mundane abilities. One of his former classmates could attest to that. One of their core concepts was to better their quirks to further enhance their lives, but what if it couldn't? What if said quirk have a hard limit that no matter how much time and effort you put in, there was no way to increase the cap? It just takes a little divide between a group to create an imbalance. And as history has shown time and time again, those with power are able to take control of the weak like pawns on a board. But this time, instead of a weak person in charge forcing a strong front, the person in charge was a literal walking nuke. There was no way to oppose him, other than another walking nuke, and if they happened to have previous unsolved discourse. The end result wouldn't be pretty. The phantom burns he felt every now and then was a reminder that, for all that society failed Katsuki and him, Katsuki was the one who failed the most. His pride and arrogance are what made him the menace that he was, and he couldn't look past it to see whether or not something was wrong. Sighing, Izuku his head. No need to dwell on the past. It was all over and done with, and he wasn't too keen on leaving the lands between. He still had his duty to become Elden Lord, whatever that meant, and Japan, and by extension, Earth, looks like it was still cohesive enough to not need another helping hand. His feet landed on the ground with a loud thud, dust kicking up in the air on impact. Dropping the bodies of the villains, he remembered the term again. Been too long since he thought of the term. On the ground without any kind of delicate care, Izuku looked to Torrent. His steed was keeping watch on the unconscious teens sprawled on the ground with their battered and bruised bodies, making sure that none that come near may harm them. He was a good boy like that. Smiling underneath his helmet, Izuku beckoned his steed over, the horse-elk hybrid giving a whinny as he trotted over. Rubbing his gauntleted arm over its head, Izuku gave Torrent a row of fruit, a personal favorite for his steed. He happily munched on the delectable fruit before he was dismissed by Izuku, turning motes of light as he vanished into thin air, although he was able to get a lick on Izuku's face before Torrent lost his corporeal form. With the area silent as the grave for now, Izuku decided to wait by the teenagers and make sure that no villain got their hands on them. Before that though, he needed to drag over the black-clad man, maybe a hero if his guess was correct, so they could share the warming stone aura. He may have a lot, but it was still limited in quantity. Izuku was a hoarder by nature, in no thanks to the influence of the lands between, and damn him if it ain't heart-wrenching to see his supply stocks go down. If one were to describe what All Might felt right now, it would be pure, unadulterated rage. There were only a few things in this world that could bring him to this point, one of which being the man who destroyed nearly all of his organs, and now, one of those lines were crossed. The villains would pay dearly for attacking children inside their own school. His feet left holes as he rushed faster and faster through the empty roads leading to the USJ, the giant domed facility looming over the horizon slowly growing bigger as he got closer. Gritting his teeth, All Might pushed even more energy into his legs. Faster, faster, he needed to be faster. His students were in danger. Blood leaked down his mouth as the exertion caused his body to rage in protest, but the pain didn't make him stop, for if he did, other people would pay the price. And he wasn't ready to tell their parents about what happened to their kids if the worst-case scenario did indeed happen. The trees behind the sidewalk blurred, his muscles bulging even more as he continued to output even more energy into his already screaming legs. This was all his fault. If only he just let the other heroes handle the lesser crimes like they normally do, he would still have enough energy to meet with his students during their field trip. It was supposed to be taught by 3 of them, after all. Him, Shota, and Anon, or 13 since she wasn't too keen on revealing her identity to even her students. A special case for a professor, to be sure, but one principal Nezu respected. Finally, after what seemed to be hours, All Might finally arrived at the USJ, the giant door leading inside left hanging open. Steeling himself, All Might donned the face he knew would make regular villains shit bricks. Time to make an entrance. Suyu's eyes twitched, her vision a mix of inky darkness and fading light. A groan left her lips as she felt her whole body twitch. And then the pain came in. She hissed, eyes shooting wide open as her hand clamped down on the gash that dotted her side. Only to look confused when the gash felt smaller than before. What? Oh, you're awake, good. Her head twisted to the sight and the figure she saw nearly made her squeak. They were a head taller than her and decked out in sturdy-looking armor. The scary part, the giant, fuck-off sword they were holding. Who are you, Kiro? Even when nervous, her verbal tick still remained, a shiver of fear coalescing down her back as she beheld the intimidating figure before her. Me, a dead man walking. The figure chuckled to themselves for a bit. Suyu's eyebrows furrowed at the self-depreciating tone but wasn't too keen on asking questions with the figure that could literally cleave her in half. Jokes aside, a portal sent me here when I was busy with my task. And I have an inkling as to who the perpetrator was. Then, what are you doing here, Kiro? Suyu tried to compose herself, but whenever that soulless-looking helmet gazed in her direction, she couldn't help but cower at the sight. Making sure you aren't villain food. Izuku gestured towards the unconscious villains who looked like they had seen better days. You're lucky, you and your friends, that I decided to visit the sinking yacht. Would have been ugly, otherwise. Suyu winced. Yeah, she could see what would have happened had the mysterious figure not saved them. Fear slowly simmering down, Suyu gathered the courage to speak her mind. Thank you for rescuing us, Kiro. Suyu bowed towards the figure, whose chuckles felt like a soothing balm amidst the crisis. It's what a hero would do. Their tone sounded like they were reminiscing. Like there was something hidden deeper within the bundle of steel and iron. Anyway, just keep your friends and that man next to this stone. It has healing properties. It was only then that Suyu felt the warmth that had been cocooning her for the past few seconds. She was awake like a comfortable blanket in the cold winter. Looking at the stone the figure pointed at, Suyu noted that it looked like a rock painted yellow with glitters shaving off. It was also warm. Like, very warm. It was a nice feeling. It'll heal your wounds and stabilize those with critical conditions until you can get professional medical treatment. The figure turned away, their back broad like a thick wall. I'll be heading my way now. Suyu was about to protest when all of a sudden, the door leading outside the USJ burst open, the large pieces of metal getting thrown out of their hinges and grating on the concrete ground. It was hard to see from this angle, but she could also spot some of her classmates holding the high ground. From the smoke and dust cloud, a figure emerged, and Suyu's heart soared. Fear not, my students. All Might's signature smile was nowhere to be found. In its stead, a frown so deep it was enough to cause even high-ranking villains to cower took its place. He gripped at his sweaty shirt and teared a portion of it off, showcasing the rippling muscle underneath. For I am here. The villains still awake to cause mayhem around the USJ, at least, those she could see from here that tried to take the high ground from her classmates, stood frozen as All Might's glare zeroed in on them. In the blink of an eye, All Might vanished from his spot before reappearing to the side of a villain who was dressed in some sort of BDSM leather strap. The villain squeaked before All Might conked her in the head, the villain going down like a sack of potatoes. This repeated for the other villains as they tried desperately to fight back to no avail. But then All Might went for the figure who saved her, and she quickly tried to voice her protest, only for the figure to dodge All Might's fist with a quick sidestep. All Might. The figure sounded broken, like all joy was sucked out of him. Strange seeing you here. Izuku looked at All Might, a tired smile hidden underneath his helmet. The figure before him cut an intimidating sight. His white shirt barely hid the muscles rippling underneath, while the frown marred on his face was able to bring any villain down on their knees. Villain. Surrender now and I promise you'll be spared further injury. All Might snarled, clearly not in his best mind right now. Looking to the side, Izuku spotted the frog girl opening her mouth to speak, only for him to focus back on All Might, his large fist hurtling towards him at rapid speeds. Izuku dodged this as well by tilting his body sidewards, the tip of his helmet's nose barely scraping against All Might's skin. Izuku's eyes trailed downward and saw a knee heading for his gut, to which he responded with a knee of his own. Metal met flesh and the resounding boom from the clash caused the nearby rubble to shake. Izuku managed to hear a grunt coming from All Might, but other than that, the frown on his face didn't change much. His welcome quite outstayed, Izuku kicked off of All Might and launched himself away from the tall, muscular blonde. While in midair, he saw All Might tense his legs as he propelled himself towards him like a speeding comet, fist cocked back ready to knock him into the next life. With a grunt, Izuku hefted All Strike to block the incoming punch. Flesh met metal once more and a loud boom echoed throughout the dome. Normally, when the flat of a blade was subjected to the force of All Might's punch, it would have snapped right in half. All Strike was not most weapons. The blade that felled a demigod didn't buckle under the strain, its shape holding firm against the impact of All Might's punch. The force behind it threw Izuku backward far enough he slammed into the gigantic set of stairs that led to the exit. A groan left Izuku's lips, his armored body deeply embedded into the concrete. Grunting, he pried himself off of the Izuku-shaped hole and stood back on his 2 feet. He was about to glare at All Might's direction for the hostility, only for him to blink when All Might was already right in front of him with another fist ready to pummel him. Already fed up with the misunderstanding, Izuku backhanded All Might's arm away and delivered a half-hearted uppercut right into where it hurts. His weakness. From the way All Might's knees buckled, Izuku assumed it to be super effective. If he wanted even more proof, look no further than the blood leaking down his lips. Credit where it was due, though. All Might didn't utter a single groan or yelp when Izuku gave the wound on All Might's flank the fist. But it wasn't enough. All Might was still going strong, and Izuku decided that he wanted a little payback for what happened to him. After all, when he ran to save Katsuki, he glimpsed a familiar set of blonde hair peeking from the crowd, watching. Staring, unmoving. He was just standing there with the power to help. Even with his time limit, with the power he held, just a few seconds was enough to get rid of the slime villain and dash off into the sunset. So yes, Izuku somewhat blamed All Might for his death, but the man before him didn't hold the entire blame. That anger went directly into the slime villain for obvious reasons, and himself for being a weak person. Katsuki was right, All Might even more so. All it took were a few deaths in the lands between to get it through his thick skull that trying to be a hero without power was just plain impossible. Izuku kicked All Might away and the muscular blonde was pushed back a few meters, his feet skidding across the ground as debris went flying. All Might, it's been months since we last met. Izuku's muffled voice gave pause to the conflict between the two. You changed, haven't you? Just looking at his face was enough to tell Izuku that All Might was confused. Not that he blamed him. 10 months was a long time for a short-lived man. Much more so for the figure in front of him who no doubt experienced a hectic life ever since he was propped up on a pedestal. All Might remained silent as Izuku stared at him from underneath his helmet. Silence overtook the area as the two did nothing but glare at each other, the air thick with strife. Wait, All Might, he's a... Izuku momentarily heard Frog Girl's voice, only for another familiar sound to grasp his full attention. D-I-E-E-E-E. An ear-piercing followed by booming explosions caused Izuku to turn and behold another familiar figure flying towards him with a ruthless smile on his face, hands outstretched ready to deliver his payload. Izuku didn't move and took the brunt of the explosion. A giant cloud of dust billowed from the point of impact, vision obscured as the earth rattled from the huge explosion. Izuku's knees buckled as he crashed onto the concrete, his armor not even dented from the attack. He lied there for a moment, his mind dredging up memories he thought he'd never recall again. The self-important smirk, the mocking laughter, the heart-clenching jeers. It made Izuku remember his roots, his reason for wanting to be a hero in the first place. Long gone were the dreams and aspiration to be like All Might. To be a hero everybody could rely on. What a joke. Izuku couldn't help but laugh. Based on what he saw during his short time in this place, Izuku deduced that the children here were hero students. He didn't know where they were, but what he knew was that they were invaded, and for some reason, All Might was supposed to be here judging by what Handy Man said before he killed the Nomu. It was frustrating. Here he was, his tormentor from his childhood, living the dream. If he was here, it meant this was a UA field trip. And All Might was probably one of their special guests. It was unfair, unfair, unfair. Why did he have to die and get sent to that miserable place? Why did he have to go through so many deaths just because of a vague quest to become Elden Lord? Why did it have to be him? He just wanted to be a hero. Maybe the universe just took affront to a whelp trying to fit into the big stage. Maybe it was just because he was unlucky. Maybe it was because life just hated him. He didn't know, and right now, Izuku didn't care. He just wants to go visit his mom, tell her he's okay, and continue his quest. Japan can survive without a quirkless teen trying to become a hero. Rising from the Izuku-shaped crater, Izuku hefted All Strike onto his shoulder and prepared to rush out of the dome. He didn't need to fight Katsuki, nor All Might. He just needed to run. Like with his first time encountering a Geel. Like with his first time encountering a Rune Bear. Like the first time he turned tail from Morgoth guarding the entrance to Stormvale Castle. It left a bitter taste in his mouth. Here he thought that he was strong enough to overcome most odds with enough trial and error. Izuku figured mental scars were a different beast entirely. Tsuyu was losing it. The knight, the person who had saved her and her classmates from the sinking yacht, being relentlessly pursued by All Might. When she was about to tell him that it was all a misunderstanding, Katsuki fucking Bakugo just had to ruin it with one of his explosions. It made her want to slap the shit out of the ash blonde. Still, it was slightly jarring, seeing the knight managing to land a punch and kicking away the symbol of peace, but that just meant that what was happening right now needed to stop. She moved to stand, only for her legs to tremble before she came crashing down. A wince left her lips as she felt her legs pulse in pain for a moment before it receded. Looking back at the billowing dust cloud, Tsuyu couldn't help but think that something was wrong. Ever since All Might arrived, the knight's demeanor changed. Sure, she spent a grand total of a few minutes talking with her savior, but she hazarded a guess that the knight wasn't that hostile when he mentioned about the villains he dropped like sacks just near them. It was also made worse when she heard the knight chuckling within the dust cloud after Katsuki blasted him. It sounded wrong, demented. Like a man right at the end of his rope. She heard rock crumbling and the shifting of metal within the billowing cloud. Eyes glued onto expanding dust, Tsuyu's eyes narrowed when she saw the figure of the knight standing with his Zweihander on his shoulder. He looked back at All Might for a second, before fully focusing on Katsuki. She didn't know what went under that helmet and neither did the other two. All was quiet for a second, the three in their stalemate, with none of them moving a muscle. Perhaps this was her chance. To tell them that the knight wasn't a villain. Tsuyu tried to open her mouth, but then everything went to shit. Faster than even her eyes could follow, the knight drew out something before blowing into it, and what appeared out of thin air was a being so majestic, she couldn't help but gaze at the creature. Even Katsuki and All Might weren't exempt from the view. Not that they let it slide when they spotted the knight climbing up his mount. Faster than she could even voice out her words, All Might rushed towards the knight while holding his side. A strange sight to be sure, and picturing it made a pit form in her gut. Meanwhile, Katsuki was growling as he prepared another one of his strong blasts, like the one he used back in the battle trials. Tsuyu shivered. Never in her life had she feared a classmate such as Katsuki. Thankfully, he was passive most of the time, and a bit antisocial. The knight blocked a blow from All Might with the flat of his sword. It was a wonder that his blade didn't crumple under the force of All Might's punch. There was also the issue of his armor getting blasted by a strong explosion with it coming out unscathed. His steed neighed and galloped while the knight held onto the reins like a seasoned veteran. Katsuki propelled himself with his explosions to try and dismount the knight, only for said knight to slap Katsuki out of the way with the flat of his sword. If anything, it was just more evidence that the knight was not a villain. Katsuki crashed right next to her, startling Tsuyu out her thoughts. She turned her head and was about to tell Katsuki to calm down, only for the blonde Pomeranian to go rushing back like a hot-blooded dog. Even All Might wasn't exempt from trying to apprehend the knight. But even the combined might of one relentless pursuer and the literal symbol of peace, they weren't able to even touch the knight while he was on his steed. This continued until he was right at the foot of the giant set of stairs leading to the entrance of the USJ. At this point, Suyu was considering just tossing something, anything really, at one of them to get their attention. And then the situation just went even worse when a giant glacier encased half of the knight and his steed's body. "Surrender, villain," Shoto Todoroki's monotone voice echoed through the dome like the ultimatum of a god. Suyu sighed. At least the knight wouldn't be able to move anymore, and she'd be able to defend him verbally. Izuku clicked his tongue. His patience was already wearing thin with the man he had mixed feelings on, hot on his tail and his old bully. Now there was this other team that could conjure ice in the mix. This was getting bothersome. Looking down on All Strike, Izuku mouth forming a frown as he unsummoned Torrent, his trusty steed neighing in protest as he vanished into blue motes. The ice not strong enough to carry his body weight broke and gravity took hold of his body. Landing on the ground, Izuku could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. His eyes roamed the area, stopping on certain people as he devised a plan to get out of here without much bloodshed. Katsuki looked feral, looking eager to blow him to the next life. The sick bastard, All Might looked like he swallowed a lemon, and the new arrival seemed to be bored. With Katsuki and All Might, he had a chance to run and leave them all behind via Torrent, fully knowing that Katsuki wouldn't be able to keep up and All Might focusing on the safety of his students first and foremost. But with the team with half-colored hair showing up, that plan just went down the drain. The glacier that encompassed half his and Torrent's body happened in nearly seconds. Sighing, Izuku sheathed his weapon and sat cross-legged on the floor. There was no point in further fighting. He wasn't their enemy anyway, they just had a big misunderstanding because he wasn't a part of their class. His mother could wait. Now, he needed to make sure that the rest of the Frog Girl's friends get out unharmed with the villains still plaguing this large dome. All Might quickly approached the knight and slapped on cuffs around his wrists while also grabbing his sheathed sword. It was a relief that the knight surrendered. From the way he backhanded his punch earlier, the knight was strong enough to possibly match him. No regular villain had ever parried one of his punches before. At least the knight made it quick. He didn't even react when the cuffs wrapped around his wrists in a tight hold, but he did however release a growl when he grabbed his sword. Understandable, but safety protocols first. Can't be too careful. Young Bakugo, All Might called the ash blonde who looked like he was still itching for a fight. Escort this villain to the rest of your class near the entrance and wait for reinforcements. If a villain comes to close, you have my permission to take them down with your quirks. A grunt was all he got, but that was par for the course for the blonde teen. Young Todoroki, you as well. This time, he didn't get any kind of verbal response, just a shrug and a slow nod. With two of his students on their way to relative safety, next was making sure the rest of his students were fine. Starting with young Asui and those that were with. Oh dear God, All Might rushed towards young Mineta, his fingers shredded and bleeding profusely. Grabbing a first aid kit he always had on his person, he disinfected the wound and wrapped the bloody appendages with gauze. The impromptu treatment would have to do until the paramedics arrive. He could already see the headlines for news outlets tomorrow. Damned vultures. No doubt, they would paint this as the failing of the school and heroes. All Might sensei. A voice garnered his attention and he turned to see young Asui with all fours on the ground. There was a misunderstanding, hero. A misunderstanding. All Might hummed and he looked at the knight who was being escorted by two students. Do you mean the knight? Why yes. He isn't a villain, hero. Suyu pointed towards Aizawa, the man looking like he had been mauled by a bear but lived to tell the tale. Zawa-sensei looked worse before you fought. He helped us, saved us, hero. His colleague, the hard-ass Aizawa, Eraserhead, Shota, worse than what he looked like right now. At a glance, he looked like he had a bunch of broken bones, his right arm was bending in a way it wasn't supposed to, and one of his elbows looked like it had decayed. At least he wasn't bleeding much like young Mineta was. What the hell happened in the USJ while he wasn't around? Shit, this is worse than I thought. He never thought that a villain group would be this bold. The only time when they had been this gung-ho was when HE was still alive and kicking. Looking at another student who was still unconscious and had a bruised face, his frown deepened. Choice made. All Might clenched his butt cheeks and moved to carry the injured. Wait, hero. Young Asui's voice made pause momentarily. Bring that stone with you, hero. The knight placed it there. It heals us, hero. Nodding along, All Might made sure to grab the stone and clutch it close to his chest as he carried the 4 people without much strain. Once he was sure that none of them would fall off when he ran, he rushed up the stairs, past young Bakugo and young Todoroki still scaling the large set of stairs with their silent captive in tow. Once at the very top, he deposited young Asui, young Mineta, young Uraraka, and Eraserhead gently to the ground, as well as making sure that the glowing rock was placed next to them. The other students who were fortunate to not be scattered by the teleporter as said by young Yida when he ran past him on his way here, were waiting for reinforcements, as well as making sure that none of the villains managed to escape. With the 4 of them secured in a safe place, all that was left was to rescue the others still scattered about the dome. Kyoka Jiro wished she was anywhere but here. Dodging a villain who had a sick grin on his face with saws for fingers, she plugged a jack into her speaker boots and let loose a soundwave of destruction. The villain clutched his ears as his insides rattled from the pressure and Kyoka's friend and classmate wasn't going to allow the opportunity to pass. A metal staff found purchase on the back of the villain's head and the man promptly collapsed on the ground. They weren't able to celebrate the takedown, however, as more villains tried to get in close. Kaminari. Do so urk, something. Kyoka grits her teeth as she felt her bones shake when she blocked a punch from a villain. I'm trying. Kaminari yelped as he grasped the wrist of another villain before sending her into a shocking nap. Haha, take Daga. Kyoka's eyes widened when she saw another villain manage to land a blow directly into Kaminari's solar plexus, the electric blonde gasping for breath. Said villain raised his hands up in the air and her throat locked in place. Thankfully, the villain didn't manage to bring it down thanks to Yaoyorozu whacking him in the forehead with her metal staff. The whole fight, the Ravenet was able to control the crowd of villains from ripping them a new asshole because of her bullshit quirk, but slowly, they were losing ground. It was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. Yaomomo, are you almost done yet? Kyoka's strangled voice sounded like a dying cat. She was stressed as all hell, what with trying to stay alive and not be a victim to these sick-in-the-head villains. Done. Get in. All of a sudden, a giant tarp quickly made its way out of Yaoyorozu's skin and into her hands. She then spread it over her and beckoned Kyoka to hurry in. Not doubting the plan of her smarter classmate, Kyoka rushed in and dove in deep, not knowing how this would help them from the villains. Kaminari. Full power. Yaoyorozu's voice carried through the mountaintops, her voice making the villains double time their actions. But what if I hit you too? Kaminari was also stressed as hell, just like her, and just like Yaoyorozu, but for God's sake, she wished that spark plug would just listen and go blasting. Yaoyorozu is smart for a reason. Don't worry about us, just do it. In the heat of the battle, there was no time to relay the specifics. There was no time to think, no time to plan. Just base instincts. Kaminari yelled and the sound of crackling electricity filled the mountaintop before it became a full-fledged roar of static. Yells and howls of pain echoed all over as the roar of static slowly gained more power, before it slowly died down. Ears ringing, Kyoka groaned as she released the hands that covered her ears. Eyes opening, she spotted Yaoyorozu and her bountiful breasts hanging open underneath the tarp. Of course she was topless, otherwise, she wouldn't be able to get the entirety of the tarp out in time. Removing the tarp over them, the 2 female students observed their surroundings, before a smile crept up their lips. All of the villains were down for the count, none of them being spared from the shock they had received from Kaminari's quirk. Speaking of Kaminari, the dork looked like an absolute buffoon while throwing up thumbs up like a loon. It looked amusing, at least until Kyoka remembered that Yaoyorozu wasn't wearing anything above her waist. Close your eyes. Kyoka rushed forward and slammed her palms directly over Kaminari's eyes, who was still going, even with the loss of his vision. Sighing, Kyoka managed a pained grimace. Her body ached, her arms felt like putty, her legs wanted to die, and her eyes felt heavy. She was so goddamn tired. Once she got back home, she was going marry her pillow and sleep to some rock and roll. God knows she needed the rest after this clusterfuck of a field trip. Just as they were in the clear, and Yaoyorozu got her modesty back, no matter how little, the three of them were about to reunite with their other classmates chilling right next to the entrance when a villain made himself known. He grabbed Kaminari, still in moron mode after short-circuiting his brain, and held him hostage. If you value your friend's life, drop your weapons and get on the fucking ground. The villain roared as a brief hint of static streaked around him. Kyoka bit her lip. She shouldn't have separated from the moron. Actually, they shouldn't have separated, period. Just a few meters made a fucking difference, and now their classmate was paying the price. Kyoka and Yaoyorozu looked at each other for a moment, before a cry of pain caught their attention. Turning their heads at the same time, they saw Kaminari's face twist into a grimace as the villain slowly squeezed his head like a grape. Last warning. Drop your fucking weapons. Kyoka wanted to cry, to rage, to shout. They were just students in their first month of hero school. They weren't supposed to fight against villains at their tender age. They were so unprepared for this moment that it could cost them one of their own lives. With the threat hanging in the air, Kyoka raised her hands and slowly moved her way to remove the speakers on her boots. Yaoyorozu did the same and dropped her metal staff to the ground and kicked it away for good measure. Good, good. Now listen, this is how it'll play out. I give you your boy toy back, and you two strip naked. If that wasn't enough, the villain just had to be a pervert, and unlike that horndog purple midget, this fucker was the real deal. The shame festered in her chest, cheeks burning as she felt hopeless in this situation. Her dignity was going to be stripped away because some villain managed to get the jump on them. Not like it would make a difference. Once the heroes arrived, it was all over for the villain. All they needed to do was make sure that their classmate lived. All it cost them was their own self-worth. Slowly, Kyoka and Yaoyorozu slipped out of their clothes, the smile on the villain's face causing their spine to shiver. They didn't want this. She didn't want this. Tears pooling at her eyes, she never noticed a figure zooming past her and socking the villain in the face, throwing him a few meters away. Everything is fine now. Why? Because I am here. Izuku quietly scaled the set of stairs along with his two captors, wrists cuffed, and weapon confiscated. He knew he could break out of the cuffs in seconds if he wanted to. All Might probably knew that as well, but it was the fact that he allowed himself to get cuffed that possibly brought relief to the number one hero. It was why he delegated both Katsuki and this half-toned hair teen to escort him to where they were hunkering down waiting for reinforcements. That also spoke to the reluctant trust for him not to go on a rampage. Not that he would do it, of course. Izuku wanted to be a hero, not a villain. Killing kids who were brand new to the scene would make him look a monster not that different from Godric the Grafted. That demigod he had no qualms killing and taking the great rune for himself. For what was the man if not a monster? Kidnapping people and grafting them onto children to make them more powerful was just one of his many heinous acts. It sickened him. He felt a rush of air sweep past him, and his eyes managed to see the blur that was All Might bringing along the 4 wounded people he saved that he left behind, seeing that no villain would have come to harm them. Not with All Might in the scene. His lips tilted down at the thought. There he was, saving people like he always was. And judging from haggard he looked when he fought him, he was almost out of time. Where was that All Might when Katsuki needed saving? When he needed saving, it was infuriating. Watching him prance along like the hero he was as he focused on making sure the 4 people he saved didn't get any more attention from the villains. Just like what happened months ago didn't matter. Like what happened to him didn't matter. Even Katsuki, terrible blonde that he was, looked like he hadn't changed personality-wise. He was still the raging bottle of anger, judging by how he doggedly pursued him like a hound chasing a cat. Just the thought of them not changing after what happened to him irked Izuku to no end. Not like it even mattered now. As far as he knew, he was considered dead, and it would remain that way in an ideal world. But this wasn't an ideal world. No, he was sure that once they were a safe spot, they would forcefully remove his helmet. He wasn't too keen on revealing himself, but what choice did he have? Break free and go on his own way. He was sure that heroes would hound him and place him inside a prison once they got their hands on him. Now he wasn't an egotistical ass like Katsuki, but with his strength, he could probably rival All Might. Key word being probably. With his weakened state, Izuku was sure he could keep up against the man with his current strength. Godric's Great Rune wasn't just for show. It spoke a lot of All Might's capabilities. He was sure if All Might managed to find himself in the lands between, he would curb-stomp Limgrave, and once he got Godric's Great Rune, he would just get stronger from there. But he wasn't. It was Izuku who found himself there. Izuku who got Godric's Great Rune, and he still had his reservations about fighting a weakened All Might. He never did see a single being yet that was able to make it rain with just a single punch. And that was at his weakened state and making sure that the bystanders' peanut gallery didn't get even remotely affected. If All Might was going serious just to apprehend him, then it was a no-brainer that he would be caught. At least he was going to put up a fight. So no, he would have to put up with the fact that he would be unmasked, a bunch of uncomfortable questions would be answered, and his gear would most possibly be confiscated by the heroes. This was going to suck, big time. At least he'll be given the rights to go meet his mother once everything blew over. Katsuki huffed, the flight of stairs too fucking long that it was agonizing his already agonized legs. He'd been training his whole life to get into perfect shape, but no way in hell did it stop fatigue. Sure, he may not show it outwardly, it was a sign of weakness after all, and villains do love assaulting weaknesses, but damn if he ain't complaining within his fucking mind. Yo, Bakubro, you finally made it. Finally, after what felt like a fucking eternity, they made it to the top of the stairs, where they were greeted by Shitty Hair, who he said to check on the others while he went and see what the fuck was happening in the plaza. Who the hell is that? Shitty Hair pointed at Tin Can 2.0 and he couldn't help but let out a growl. The fucker was strong, stronger than him, and it fucked with his mind to no end. Much worse that the fucker surrendered after he got iced by Half and Half's bastard quirk. Tin Can 2.0 managed to hold himself pretty well against him and All Might combined, and he gotta pay respect where respect was due, but fucker was a villain, so fuck him. Villain. Keep an eye on him. Katsuki grunted and looked over the students who didn't get scattered by Warpgate. Still no reinforcements. Well, All Might is here, so we can relax. Shitty Hair grinned and Katsuki nearly uttered a curse. Who cares if All Might is here? He can't go to all the areas at the same time. Much more, that day let him know that the #1 hero is just human. He ain't the perfect paragon of justice everyone and their mothers are parading him as. He makes mistakes, made mistakes, and Deku paid the price. Grunting, Katsuki approached the group with a scowl on his face. No point in trying to save the others. They can handle themselves, otherwise, how the fuck did they even get in the hero course? And then he saw Frog Face, Cheeks, fucking Pervert, and Aizawa-sensei. What the fuck happened to them? Pervert had a few missing fingers, Cheeks had her clothes nearly ripped to shreds, specifically, near her private parts. Frog Face had a nasty gash on her side though wrapped in bandages, and Aizawa-sensei looked like death was looming over him. Shit, if this happened to them, what the hell would happen to the others? Turning heel, Katsuki was about to head back down the stairs to the protest of his legs, before an arm clasped over his shoulder. Bakubro, where are you going? The concern on Shitty Hair's face was enough of a sign to know that the artificial redhead was worried for him. Save the others. As a hero, it was their duty to save those helpless to save themselves. His past deeds against Deku were a mistake, a blemish on his record. Hell, he wasn't the only one he tormented to save his own ego. Rustling metal caught his attention and he looked towards Tin Can 2.0 with a frown. The hell you looking at? Silence was all that greeted him, before he heard a raspy chuckle coming out from underneath the helmet. Did he dare mock him for trying to save people? The fucking villain. Of all the people to mock him, it had to be a fucking villain. The goddamn nerve. Can't believe you of all people would want to save people. The muffled voice sent a chill down his back. A vague sense of fear and disgust welled up within him as he continued to gaze at the villain. I thought you wanted to be the #1. Beat up every villain to secure that spot. The villain continued to chuckle, the sight making his body tense and rigid. Shitty Hair, noticing his dilemma, growled at the villain. Hey, who the hell do you think you are? Shitty Hair approached the villain with a menacing growl. What makes you have the right to mock Bakubro's desire to save people? Villain. Why? One of his former victims, of course. The villain slowly turned back to him. He could imagine the grin underneath that goddamned helmet. Isn't that right, Kachan? The moment he saw the recognition on Katsuki's face, Izuku couldn't help but grin maliciously. Oh, the sight of it nearly made him laugh out loud. It was cathartic, in a sense. Here was his former tormentor, looking like he had seen a ghost as he stood still like a statue. He would have never seen him this way back then. Did he change? Of course he did, but that desire to save people. It was laughable. His bully, his tormentor, out here trying to save the lives of his classmates because what? He cared. Because he wanted redemption. Because it was out of a sense of guilt from when he died. Izuku didn't know, and he really didn't care anymore. It was his own business what he did with his life now. Frankly, he respected the ash blonde as he was now. No longer was he that egotistical maniac like he thought he would be. He was still unhinged, don't get him wrong, but at least he mellowed out now. But he would never forget, nor forgive what he'd done to him. If he wanted to play hero and save lives, let him. It wasn't his problem anymore. It was his, and his alone. Just like it was his duty to become Elden Lord and reform the Elden Ring in the lands between, whatever that meant. He was still trying to figure out what to do with his quest, and Melina won't tell him the specifics yet. Just gather the great runes and head to Lindell where the Erd Tree resides. He was brought out of his musings when he felt hands grasping his shoulders, the fingers trembling ever so slightly. His eyes gazed into red piercing orbs that shook and trembled. Deku. And of course, Katsuki just had to say out his insulting nickname. But not really that bothersome anymore. Not when the lands between had it out for him every step of the way. At that point, nicknames meant nothing, and actions drove the whole point. Yes, then again, seeing Katsuki shake and tremble was very cathartic. It felt great, like the whole revenge thing without any unnecessary bloodshed. No need to bury a grave for two, all he had to do was just show up and watch the target of his ire gasp and mimic a fish out of water. What is it, Kachan? Surprised to see me? Then again, it's been, what? Nearly a year since we've last seen each other. You fucking died. You fucking died. I saw you fucking die. How the fuck are you still alive? Katsuki's yells were music to his ears. Now he was expressing his guilt because he saw him bite the dust. Where was that when he had to reset some bones after a beating from him and his cronies? Where was that when he had to cover up the bruises and gashes after they practiced their quirks on him? I got better, Izuku plainly said. Good thing his helmet was hiding the smile underneath. Fucking got better. You were split in fucking half. Spittle flew from his mouth and into his helmet. Gross. How the hell did you survive? A quick glance behind him saw to the other students looking curiously at them, and not a pleasant kind of curiosity. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Izuku shrugged and used his cuffed hands to slowly remove Katsuki's hands from his shoulders, before he chuckled a bit. Not like I won't be spilling my guts out when the heroes and police get here. He slowly reached for his helmet and began to unfasten the straps that held it in place. It was a bit uncomfortable, what with the cuffs holding his wrists together, but otherwise a non-factor. With a bit of elbow grease, Izuku finally removed the helmet and stared directly into Katsuki's eyes, his red orbs dilated to pinpricks. Now he knew why Patches got a kick out of messing with him. It was kind of fun doing it to others. As long as they deserved it. Tenya's legs felt like they were being roughshod over hot coals, his chest heaving up and down as he tried to get his breathing back in order. Yo, little listener, you feelin' alright? Beside Tenya, present Mike gazed at him with a slight frown. You can stay in the truck while we go rescue your other classmates. Thank you, Mike-sensei, but I have to help. Tenya felt like he was going to collapse at any moment, the exhaustion he felt from running non-stop for the better half of an hour taking its toll on him. My classmates. Iida, leave it to the pros. Another hero voiced her concern, the tight spandex costume showing off her curves. You can take a rest. Even pros have to leave the work to others when they're completely spent. But still, Tenya really struggled to keep his eyes open, the corners of his vision swimming from black to dark the longer he continued to stay awake. It's fine, Iida, a high-pitched voice squeaked, the tone light and jovial, but there was no hiding the palpable rage radiating underneath the facade. Rest your head. As principal of UA High School, I promise you to safely deliver your classmates from harm. The reassurance coming from the mouse-bear-rat hybrid was the last straw, and Tenya felt himself give away, eyes closing as he embraced the darkness. Nezu eyed the sleeping teen, his eyes furrowed as he felt the desire to mutilate those who had dared to invade his school. Poor kid, Snipe muttered from underneath his mask, hands fiddling with the twin revolvers to prepare for the inevitable shootout. How long until we get there? Not long now. Vlad King, the man who was driving the truck carrying them along, growled with a fury in his eyes. Can't this thing go any faster? Who knows what might happen to the students while we aren't there? Midnight, the ever-loving mother hen of the group, bit her lip. She may dress like a stripper, as far as his intellect goes, but she was no doubt the most caring of the bunch. Relax, Kayama, All Might is there. Present Mike tried to reassure the woman, but no doubt he was feeling just as antsy as Midnight was. He should be kicking the asses of the villains right about now. Now that statement right there was unacceptable. To heap on the hopes and expectations on a single man wasn't a feasible solution to their detrimental society. He was sure to cut it out of the bud when the teachers here started their job, but humans will be humans, emotional creatures that they are. Even if All Might is currently holding back the villain menace, never forget to provide aid to those affected. Nezu grin knew it brought chills down their spines. Oh, how he loved tormenting them so. Sadly, his hobby of messing with his employees must be put to the wayside now in favor of reminding them of the harrowing truth. All Might is just a man. You've all seen his injury. Do not prop him on a pedestal like the others in our society do. His piece said. The heroes within the truck went silent. Good thing their student was asleep, otherwise there would be a chance of an information leak. Something Nezu wasn't too keen on, what with the HPSC nibbling at his coattails for any kind of vulnerability. The rest of the drive was bathed in silence as the heroes prepared themselves for the worst-case scenario. Nezu, meanwhile, was simulating scenarios upon scenarios on the possible outcomes this villain invasion may come to bring. Did one his students die? Did multiple of them die? What about the other side? Did a villain die? How about injuries? Grievous or minimal? So many scenarios, not enough time to think. Even with his quirk that made him into the intellectual powerhouse that he was, time was an ever-present constant that always hindered his calculations. Nezu sighed, the others picking up on his action but none of them daring to speak up against him. As they should. He was already furious at the fact that mere villains decided to attack the one place he had his hands on, but if the HPSC managed to catch wind of it, it would mean lesser influence amongst the masses. From his calculations alone, if the society continues as the HPSC deems it acceptable, it will cripple the human race entirely, what with their influence slowly spreading all over the globe. It was already a hassle with villains mucking about and making a mess of things everywhere. But an enemy that was disguised as your ally was just as dangerous, if not more so, than villains scheming in the background. After all, villains can be targeted, but those on his side require a certain finesse to make sure that he cannot be condemned by the general public. It was one thing to imprison a villain who had killed innocents, it was another to imprison a person who in the eyes of society seemed to do a lot of good, even if it was detrimental in the long run. At least the problem was still contained within Japan. But if the ideals of the HPSC managed to intensify across the globe, it would mean the worst-case scenario for every human being on the planet. Case in point, the prohibition of quirk usage by the masses. It was necessary, do not get him wrong, but when a person is unable to defend himself with his quirk because if he does so, he may be implicated by the law, that was just too much. It was why he respected Destro, even if how he went through with his plans were Machiavellian and produced too much bloodshed. Quirks must be regulated, but that does not mean a quirk must be banned entirely if a person doesn't have a card that says he can't use it. It was a part of them. A biological evolution from the now rare Homo sapiens. Should he stop being smart because his quirk was always on? Should those with mutation quirks sit down and beg for mercy because using their enhanced strength or extra limbs was illegal? Even now, those with mutation quirks were being discriminated against because of how different they look, or how different they function. There was this one time where a person was jailed because he defended himself against a thief with his extra hand. It got him fined and a permanent black mark in his portfolio for vigilantism. It was ridiculous. Of course, the quirk users, or metahumans in the case of the Metahuman Liberation Front heralded by the deceased Destro, were and are still considered Homo sapiens, but a variant subgroup. One paper he'd read about a suggestion that they name quirk users Homo sapien potentia, but didn't get much traction because 1. He proposed it when the population size of the metahumans were still smaller than normal human beings, and 2. It was during a very, very dark time for humanity. Scientifically, the term metahuman is the most used term in papers and research. Quirk user is just the catch-all term used by everyday people. Nezu blinked. Okay, he got too deep into his head again. Such is the life of an animal with a quirk that allowed him to surpass the intelligence of humans. The truck stopped and Nezu looked out the window. The giant dome that roofed the entirety of the USJ stood looming over them, its large doors hung open. He could spot some of the students through the gaps and fortunately, they looked mostly okay. "We're here. Get out," Vlad King roared and unbuckled his seatbelt before rushing out of the truck. The other heroes followed suit, with Present Mike toting along Nezu like a stuffed toy since he was tiny. Time was of the essence and a second they spent running towards the doors meant another second for the possibility for a student to be killed. Izuku couldn't help but grin at the gaping mouth of Katsuki. The other students looked at him in confusion and a bit of dread, probably because of the blonde blurting out that he was supposed to be dead. Also might be because of the split in half part. Definitely because of the split in half part. I can show you the scar of when I got bisected, but you'd have to remove my cuffs and I'd have to get naked. His suggestion was met with silence and the still gaping maw of Katsuki. It was kind of surreal. Never in his life had he expected Katsuki to be on the back foot when the two of them interacted. It was always him on the ground, and the blonde towering over him with a menacing smile. Now, it was the reverse. Somewhat. Replace fear with shock and menacing with teasing. Also, now that he thought of it, he was taller than Katsuki. Taller. He was sure that Katsuki had inches over him, but now, it felt like he had foot over him. No, it didn't feel like it, he was a foot taller than him. Something to get used to but ultimately not that important. Still, it was funny that he towered over Katsuki rather than the blonde doing so to him. He could get used to this. Sadly, as much as he wanted to mess with Katsuki some more, or as much as he wanted to skewer him with all strike that was still being held by that half-colored teen, he saw no point in it. No need to paint himself as the villain here. All secrets were bound to be revealed, and when the past of Katsuki bullying and suicide baiting him surfaced, well, he would want to see the fireworks. He raised an eyebrow when Katsuki was about to speak but was interrupted when a shout came from the entrance exit of the USJ. "Have no fear, students. We are here." A colorful cast of heroes with a tiny animal dressed in a suit perched on the shoulders of one that had speakers around his neck arrived. "Where are the other students?" The one who yelled was said hero with the speakers on his neck. The students all looked at each other with relief before they all said some things that got drowned out when they all spoke in unison. One by one. "We don't have enough time." The hero yelled once more and Izuku finally remembered who the hero was. Present Mike, the DJ hero whose music he listened to every day. They were scattered all over the USJ. "We don't know where they are." One of the students who had a bunch of arms was the one who responded. "Thank you. Now you heard the teen. Get moving." With another shout, Present Mike as well as the rest of the heroes went on the move, not wasting even a single second with pointless banter. They glanced over Izuku with a frown, noting the handcuffs that was restricting his wrists, but paid him no mind as they went on their way to save the other students still fighting for their lives. At least they have their priorities straight. A loud yell that nearly ruptured his eardrums caught him flat-footed as Izuku nearly stumbled at the sudden noise. Looking over to the stairs where the sound originated, a bunch of villains that were trying to scale the steps were all rolling to the ground once they got a taste of Present Mike's quirk. Yeah, no, he'd rather fight Godric again than submit himself to that. Oh, he could win easily, no doubt about it. It would just be annoying and a pain in his ass if it ever came to it. As the heroes scattered to go help the other students, Izuku looked back at Katsuki who didn't turn his gaze away from him. "Any more questions you have tucked in that egotistical head of yours?" Izuku's tone dropped a bit, and he relished the way Katsuki squirmed in place. "Also, could you tell Redhead here to stop? He looks like he wants to throttle me into next week." "Damn, When did he get so snarky? Maybe it was because of Patches. Yeah, definitely Patches. The redhead looked like he wanted to throttle me even more, and I saw his legs tense, as if prepared to pounce. Luckily, it didn't happen when Katsuki placed a hand on his shoulder. Kirishima, let me handle this. The way Kirishima's eyes bulged was kind of funny, but he didn't dare laugh now. Katsuki looked like he was heading to his execution. Katsuki's heart thumped within his chest, the sight before him dredging up memories that haunted his past. Each step he took towards the figure waiting ahead of him made his knees buckle, his breathing haggard. A children's playground surrounded the two, a reminder of what he had lost. It faded into the entrance to the USJ, the surrounding students looking at them in clear confusion. A reminder of what he had let go and trampled upon. The scrawny kid that refused to fade was now replaced by a towering behemoth. And that grin, that damned grin, why didn't he hate him? No matter how hard he stared into those piercing green orbs, he couldn't find the deep loathing he should have had. There was a smidge of hate there, but that was drowned out by the pure apathy that swirled within his core. Where was the hate he deserved? Where were the insults? The fucking punches, kicks? Why didn't he do to him what he did all those years ago? It was his fucking right. He deserved it all. His hate, his grief, all the things he had ever done to him should have been rendered to him twice, no, tenfold. So where was it? What? Cat got your tongue, Kachan. There it was. That impish grin. Like what he did to him didn't matter. Like all the torment he went through didn't matter. He stopped right in front of Izuku, the teen. No, the man grinning at him while he stewed in his darkest thoughts. His mouth opened but refused to let out a sound. Clamping it shut, he swallowed a thick muck of saliva as he tried to get his thoughts in order. As if sensing his thoughts, Izuku was content to remain silent, all the while that damned grin of his never left his face. A pat on the shoulder caused him to shudder, his senses going on overdrive as his spine tingled. Bakubro, you good man. Shitty hair just had to look concerned for him. Fuck, he didn't need his concern. Growling, Katsuki gazed back at the man who had haunted him for over the past year. Stealing his nerves, Katsuki glared into Izuku's green orbs, the mirth hidden underneath all too obvious to the ash blonde. How are you here? Izuku raised an eyebrow at his question. Seeing the greenette not answering his question, Katsuki let out a low growl and took another step forward. I saw your fucking corpse at your funeral. I was there when they cremated your ass. I was there when they buried your ashes in your family cemetery. So how the fuck are you here? He heard gasps coming from behind him in the peanut gallery, but he didn't care. His attention was solely focused on the teen before him, the teasing grin still present on his freckled face. I don't know. Izuku shrugged, the pieces of metal he wore grinding against each other producing a cacophony of chinks and clanks. One moment I was somewhere else, then another, I was here inside that dome over there. He pointed towards the dome where Katsuki and Shitty Hair came from. A pit formed in his stomach. Looking at the weapon that half-and-half bastard was toting along, struggling a bit by the looks of things, he put two and two together before he looked at the teen before him with fear and a bit of disgust. Was it you who killed those villains? Shitty Hair behind him made another gasp. He could imagine what his face was making. Who could blame the fucker? The villains were literally cut in fucking half, their guts spilling all over the floor. If he hadn't seen, nor smelled the odor the first time it happened months ago, he would be retching just like Shitty Hair on the floor when they found the corpses. He knew he would. He did the same as well. So, what if I did? The tone was strong, confident, and even a touch apathetic. It sent ice crawling down his spine. Shitty Hair and the others were no different. The figure before them was a motherfucking murderer. You, eyes alert, Katsuki felt his instinct kick in as his palms released sweat. Shitty Hair probably did the same with his quirk, what with the fucking noise coming from behind him. Even his other classmates got ready for a fight, with half-and-half bastard no less. You bastard. Shitty Hair raised his voice and moved to punch Izuku, only to be stopped by a paw patting the back of his leg. Now, Kirishima. As much as a murderer deserves to get their face knocked in, you are all heroes in training, and assaulting a villain who has all but surrendered is in violation with the law. The rat principal of the school gave a light-hearted chuckle, but everyone there could feel the underlying threat underneath his tone. Continue with your action and I may have no choice but to expel you on grounds of vigilantism. Shitty Hair stood ramrod still with his fist cocked back, ready to punch Izuku in the noggin, only for him to lower it and click his tongue, all the while glaring at the greenette in armor. Now, if I may be so inclined to ask, who are you? Izuku looked at the rat bear mouse chimera with a raised eyebrow. Not that he wasn't thankful for calming down the redhead, he had no quarrel with him, but he was confused, so to speak. He knew that quirks were varied and different, but one that made you look like a tiny animal. Yeah, that was a bit weird, even for his tastes. Still, even behind that cheerful facade, he could see a cold and calculating being behind that scarred eye of his. Wait a minute, tiny animal in a suit, scarred eye. Alright, the memories were coming back now. This was Nezu, the principal of UA High School, an actual animal with a quirk, not a person with a mutation. And with the various horror stories people had with interacting with said principal. Yeah, he'd better be on his best behavior. He didn't want to complicate things any further and risk the chance of him seeing his mother. Midoriya Izuku, he gave the rat a bow. Might as well lean into theatrics for the hell of it. Midoriya, Nezu hummed and his eyes grew a tad sharper. Now where have I heard that name before? Looking at Katsuki, the blonde didn't speak up, head tilted down as he averted his gaze. And here he thought the blonde would make his life easier and just say that he died saving him months ago. Still, he was cremated and buried, huh? He wondered how his mother would have reacted to his death. It was a no-brainer that the poor woman would wallow in grief. He hoped that she didn't take the way out like he thought to do so many times. So many times. Anyway, not important for now. Nezu took a quick glance at the cuffs binding his wrists before he turned to face and muttered to himself, which his enhanced ears managed to hear. Saving the kids is more important. At least he could appreciate Nezu's priorities. Why bother with a villain who was clearly complying with authority rather than the others who were still hell-bent on resisting? That, and the other students who, frankly, got dealt a shit hand with this invasion. Oh, by the way, Midoriya. Izuku's attention snapped to Nezu, his tiny back facing him. If you would please make this easier on the rest of us, sit down just right next to Midnight. I assure you, your rights will be protected as long as you comply with our demands. There was a threat if Izuku ever saw one, but one he had no problem with adhering to. As far as they knew, he was a villain who surrendered and then was simultaneously captured. Of course, they would still be wary. Now as for sitting next to Midnight, who was she again? A waving woman caught his eye, and he had to bring down the wrath of the demigods before his junior could slam its head against the confines of his armor. It was just a figure of speech, by the way. Even after months of fighting, killing, and dying, teenage hormones will be teenage hormones. Midoriya, do we really have to be physical right now? Nezu's eyes narrowed at him, and Izuku internally grimaced. Yeah, they were on edge. Might as well hurry along now to not cause them problems while they saved the other students. Without further delay, he walked towards Midnight, who was eyeing him with a sultry look, but deep below he knew that the woman was as alert as can be, before he plopped his ass on the ground right next to her. The woman didn't show any sign of tension, but judging from how rigid she was like a coiled snake, ready to pounce if he ever so much as moved wrong. He wasn't going to lie, he respected that action. Just because he was complying, doesn't mean he wasn't a threat. His ass squirmed atop the hard concrete, the metal of his armor grinding against hard stone. The ground was hard and rough, but the exhaustion of the day caught up with him, so instead of sitting, Izuku laid down and closed his eyes. He forgot that he had been going for nearly the whole day now, and he was still feeling tired from the fight with Smaug. And with his honed practice of sleeping wherever he wanted to as long as there were no threats, his mind blanked out as he embraced the soothing darkness of the void. Did he just go to sleep? Kirishima pointed at the villain. With his right hand. Bakugo, meanwhile, had a mix of emotions on his face, something to delve into once the dust of this incident is settled. That reminds him, he really should be increasing Hound Dog's salary, what with the influx of traumatized students he'd be sending his way. Principal Nezu, he was taken out of his thoughts as a student. One Asui slowly made her way towards him. Yes, my dear student. Is there anything I can help you with? Nezu gave a cheery grin and studied every facial tic the girl had. With her frog-like features, it was a tad difficult reading her mannerisms, but otherwise, not too much of a problem. About the villain, Hiro. Nezu raised an eyebrow and Asui pointed towards the now sleeping armored villain that looked no older than the students. He isn't a villain, Hiro. Oh, what did he do? Nezu's curiosity was piqued. It was already piqued before, but with this new revelation, his interest skyrocketed. He saved me, saved us, Hiro. She then pointed to Uraraka, Mineta, whose injury was already giving him a headache, on how to approach his parents, and surprisingly, an unconscious Aizawa. Did he now? Nezu hummed as he stared at the downed form of Midoriya, who was quite comically taking a nap right next to Midnight. If the press were to see this sight, they would immediately conclude that Midnight used her quirk on a surrendering villain. Oh, he could already imagine the headlines made by those vultures. Is it any wonder why Aizawa detests the media so? But alas, that was a thought for another day. Right now, his employees were scouring through the USJ and saving any student they come across. The pictures they painted made him sigh in relief. It didn't take long for the students to all be gathered just a few meters shy of the exit. All of them were fine, shaken and traumatized, but relatively fine. All Might did good in arriving early and making sure that the students in more dire straits were prioritized first. Say what you will of the bumbling oaf, the man had a heart of gold and the wits of a seasoned veteran. Izuku stared out of the car window, the trees outside zooming past them as the sirens wailed along the road. His eyes closed, the memory of the chaotic end of the day filtered through his mind. The medics and policemen swarmed the scene, tending to the wounded and handcuffing the villains. Despite the frog girl's insistence that he wasn't one of the villains, the officer's pointed glances and firm grip on his arm told him that they weren't convinced. And even with the somewhat rough treatment, Izuku couldn't blame them. Protocol was protocol, after all. At least they didn't push him to the ground and pressed their knee against his windpipe to the point of suffocation. Shoved into the back seat of the police car, Izuku's head drooped as his body cooled down from the action. The roaring engine of the speeding car was a harsh tune that rattled his ears. Each time his eyes fluttered shut, the officer in the passenger seat would twist around, a flashlight beam piercing through the dark. His jaw tightened while his eyebrows twitched at the action, fingers drumming his knees in an attempt to not give the officer a piece of his mind. A normal person would have already passed out, but Izuku was far from normal. His senses were honed through trials and tribulations, and every time he could sense someone or something staring at him, his instincts would kick in. Thus, why he was staring out of the window. He couldn't sleep, so he might as well pass the time by gazing out into the open world. His fingers twitched at the thought his items being confiscated by the policeman, much more so with the bottomless box. His gaze flickered to the bottomless box kept out of reach, sitting in the hands of the officer in the passenger seat. His fists clenched, eyes narrowing ever so slightly at the sight. The thought of the officers poking through his belongings made his skin prickle. At least the only one that could access it was him. He could just get it back later, through force if necessary. As for his armor, they tried. They really did, but Izuku would not budge. Tensions were high until the rat principal, Nezu if he remembered correctly, assuaged their concerns about the heavily armored man that looked like he could rip a man in half. And wasn't that statement true? He wondered what would happen if they found the bisected remains of the villains he accidentally killed in the conflagration zone. Actually, would there even be remains left at all? The fire there was still going strong, artificially produced he surmised, even after everything was all said and done. After a bit of thinking, he concluded that yes, there would be remains. Flesh might burn and turn to ash, but bones would remain, bleached but whole. The fire there wasn't strong enough to incinerate a skeleton, and knowing how advanced technology was in Japan, their forensics team would no doubt find out that they were killed by not the flames, but a blade. Said blade being safeguarded by another police officer in another car in their convoy. Izuku sighed. Hopefully, everything that happens later would resolve peacefully, otherwise, he'd hate what he had to do to get back to the lands between. He was protective of his runes, okay. It was going to be such a waste to dump all of these runes just to return to the last grace site he'd rested on. Izuku's fingers tapped rhythmically on the metal table, the soft impacts sounding like thunder in the enclosed room. Arms still cuffed and lately linked to the table, he squirmed about in his seat for a bit, trying to find a good spot where his ass wouldn't feel like it was pressed against a rock and a hard place. He's been in this room for about half an hour now, the ticking clock just hung up on the wall letting him know the time of the day. Beside the clock, an opaque window cut through the wall and a metal door stood just right next to it. Sighing once more, Izuku's fingers continued to tap against the table as he waited. He knew some people were watching through the one-way window, but could it trouble them to just get this over with already? Time spent here was time spent doing nothing when he could already be at his mother's home talking and spending time with her. The tapping continued, the table vibrating each time the impact landed. It started slow, matching the tempo of the ticking clock, but as the seconds passed, its speed increased. Gradually, the tempo was heightened, again and again, until the sound that echoed through the chambers was the rapid impact of metal against metal. A few minutes later and the tapping stopped. Izuku's eyes narrowed at the door that clicked and swung open, revealing a figure heading inside. He had a sand-colored trench coat hiding the white dress shirt and dark blue tie underneath. His steps echoed through the room, and the door behind him was brought to a close by another officer waiting behind it. "Good afternoon, Midoriya Izuku." The detective ended the greeting with a question, to which Izuku nodded. "All right then. So, first off, let's start off simple." The detective took a seat opposite of Izuku, his eyes never leaving the greenette's piercing green orbs. "Are you part of the invasion force that assaulted the USJ?" A simple question left the detective's lips and Izuku didn't hesitate. No, the detective didn't show any kind of hint that he was surprised, to which Izuku applauded mentally. Next question. During the invasion, what were you doing? Izuku's heart remained steadfast, the question already foreseen. Saved some of the students and killed the Nomu that sent a teacher to the ER. At that, the detective showed a slight twitch just on his upper brow. He should have. The state the Nomu's corpse was in left little to the imagination on how its last moments must have been. "I see." Tsukauchi frowned, his gloved finger tapping on the table. "Are you aware that you may be charged with vigilantism and first-degree murder because of what you have done?" "What about my self-defense?" Izuku's frown grew. The thought of him being charged because he saved a bunch of kids in danger was ridiculous. "Or how about me saving those that would have died if I wasn't there? The teacher in the ER looked like he wouldn't be breathing if I hadn't patched him up after getting beaten to near death by the Nomu. And I am eternally grateful for your actions." Tsukauchi showed a smile and Izuku knew that he was being genuine. It then morphed into a frown as the detective let out a long exhale. "That said, nobody is above the law, and you, Midoriya, have been found to have committed murder against 3 villains because a key witness had divulged what had happened in the conflagration zone." "Ah, yes, the part where he inadvertently bisected 2 villains because they were flimsy as a wet noodle. He thought that they would have found out about it by analyzing the remains of the bodies, but the villain that escaped spilled the beans first. Does it even matter? They are villains that had intentions to murder literal children during their field trip. Not that he wasn't underage as well. He just looked old because of the runes that strengthened him, pushing his body to the point where his muscles and bones could endure the output of his strength. I'm afraid it isn't that simple." Tsukauchi shook his head. "Even heroes are bound by this no-killing rule. Unless judged by a majority of the HPSC executives that a certain villain must be dealt with lethally, a villain mustn't be killed by a hero. No matter how justified it would be. Now I remember why I didn't like the hero system." Izuku muttered underneath his breath. During his travels in the lands between, he tried going about it by upholding the hero system that was in place in Japan. That got him killed numerous times until he dropped the holier-than-thou act and got to brutalizing the hostile entities that dared provoke him. Of course, he gave them a chance first to stop and turn away, but they were dogged in their pursuit to rid him of his life. What if I said that the villains killed in the conflagration zone was a mistake? When Izuku's words left his lips, he noticed the detective's eyebrow raise a few centimeters upward. "Excuse me." Tsukauchi looked a bit shocked. Not like Izuku could blame him. It was pretty hard to swallow the fact that 2 people were dead because they were sliced cleanly in half. They were soft like tissue. I didn't expect my blade to go through them like tofu. The foes I face are much hardier than that. And now the detective was going pale. Was it the nonchalance, or the fact that he was used to more challenging enemies? The room was bathed in a brief silence before the detective cleared his throat a few seconds later. Quote, "Be that as it may, you will still be charged with third-degree manslaughter for the two bisected villains." Izuku hummed. It was weird how the detective just took his word at face value. Does he have some kind of mind-reading quirk? That would explain why he changed the charges. As for the Nomu, I'm afraid it will remain as first-degree murder. Well, legal-wise, it wasn't wrong. Izuku could understand why he was charged so. It didn't mean he had to like it. Don't worry, we'll make sure that you get off as light as possible. Tsukauchi then bowed his head towards Izuku. Please, accept my wholehearted thanks for saving those kids in Eraserhead. Oh, so that was the name of the teacher, hero. Eraserhead. He was sure he knew that name from somewhere, but he couldn't find it by trudging through his already muddled mind. The deaths he endured did a number on some of his memories, it seems. Can I make a request? The detective raised his head when he heard Izuku speak. Tsukauchi nodded and listened attentively. Can I please see my mother? Her name is Midoriya Inko. The detective paled. Outside of the room, All Might, currently in his deflated form, paled rapidly as he heard the name of the mother of the armored man sitting in the interrogation booth. Sitting on his shoulder, Nezu tilted his head at the blonde, beady eyes twinkling as the animal stared at his rapidly paling complexion. Toshinori, whatever is the matter? Nezu frowned when he got no response from the gaunt blonde, so he did what any animal would do to get attention from the humans. Smack the side of his face with his paws. Ack, Principal Nezu. Nezu grinned. He's lucky that he didn't extend his claws, or the man would have another injury for Recovery Girl to look at. Finally got your attention, haven't I? Nezu patted the blonde on the head. You've been silent the whole while Detective Tsukauchi was questioning this Midoriya Izuku. Something on your mind, perhaps. All Might remained silent for a good moment, before he sighed and let out a low exhale. It doesn't make any sense. Now that wasn't something Nezu predicted he would hear. He assumed that it would have been something along the lines of a person he saved but failed him later on with his family. The last time I saw the teen was months ago. He was a scrawny kid with little to no muscles. Now that brought up question marks. Looking at the handcuffed man, Nezu just couldn't comprehend that the man was in fact a teen. Was it a quirk, perhaps? Something that made him age rapidly? But if so, then wouldn't he be looking like 30? Maybe 40 right about now if he got his quirk at the tender age of 4. But something wasn't right. All Might wasn't telling the entire truth, and a pointed glare towards the symbol of peace solved it. He was also dead, bisected in half by the slime villain. All Might say what now? Tsukauchi's heart beat once, twice, thrice, then skipped the fourth before it continued as normal. His eyes locked onto the teen's green orbs, the palpable hope lying underneath nearly making the detective refuse his request right then and there. The watch on his wrist continued to tick by as he found his mouth unable to utter a single sound while the man in front of him slowly became a bit perturbed. Is something wrong? Midoriya pursed his lips, the words exiting his mouth slapping Tsukauchi out of his sudden inability to speak. My apologies, Midoriya, but I'm afraid your request is impossible to consider at this point in time. Tsukauchi was quick to think of various excuses as to why. You see, the authorities have labeled you, as of now, as a tentative villain, bordering on vigilante due to what happened in the USJ. As such, any outside contact is prohibited due to security reasons. I hope you're understanding of your situation. Midoriya hummed, and the detective had a feeling that the man didn't like it, but he was accepting of the situation that surrounded him. Very well. That said, how long until all this is over? Once the villains are all accounted for and give their testimonies, we shall see what will happen. Tsukauchi's heart slowed down, a breath of relief leaving his lips. But rest assured, from the testimonies gathered from the victims, we will make sure that you will be free from charges labeling you a villain. Good to know. Izuku sighed as Tsukauchi made to exit the room. With his back turned, his stomach flipped back and forth as he felt the stare from Midoriya bore onto his back. Grabbing the handle, he looked once more at the man and gave him a slight nod, before he headed out and was greeted by All Might and Nezu with frowns on their faces. All Might wasn't that one that spooked him, however, it was Nezu's frown that made all of his mental danger bells whine in panic. Whenever the rat looked like that, Somebody's day was about to be ruined. He sure hoped it wasn't him. He already had his hands full with this confusing case. Detective Tsukauchi, I assume you are done with questioning Midoriya Izuku. Tsukauchi hastily nodded his head, not wanting to be the target of ire the little rat could give. Good. Then allow me permission to speak with the man who had saved my students and one of my employees. In but a split second, Tsukauchi stepped aside from the door and allowed the rat entry. No way would he jeopardize his job and safety because he wanted to deny the rat the satisfaction of his curiosity. Oh, by the way, this will be off the record, am I clear? Tsukauchi moved to deactivate the sound recording devices faster than ever in his life. Nezu's beady eyes locked onto the man sitting behind the desk, hands chained like a dangerous criminal. However, his eyes said otherwise. This being was a beast. A dangerous beast that could rip of his restraints in but a fraction of a second if he was so inclined. But he surmised that the man viewed it as either beneath him, or counterproductive to his goals. A sentiment that Nezu could respect. Climbing up the chair because human-sized chairs weren't kind to his plush-sized body, Nezu couldn't help but gaze into the piercing green orbs that was Midoriya's eyes. Or more specifically, the hint of a slit pupil. If he squinted his gaze long enough, Nezu could spot the slight constriction of his pupil from circle-shaped to slit-shaped. It was a nice touch of detail to add to the mysterious savior of his precious students. And that begs one of the many questions he had in store for the man. What is your quirk? Nezu propped his snout on his two hands as he leaned forward. Midoriya didn't show any kind of body response from the sudden line of question, causing a hint of a smirk to show on his face. Nothing. That was an answer he didn't expect to be given. Such a mystery, and Nezu loved mysteries. It was probably time to go diving into the Japanese records again, dig up more information about this peculiarity sitting right in front of him. What we got from the security cameras told otherwise. He remembered the video with Midoriya turning, or maybe summoning it would be an apt description, his arm into that of a giant-scaled reptile. Quite possibly a dragon quirk, but unlike Yukyu's full-body transformation, it was a partial transformation. Questions for another time, he supposed, once he has Yukyu in the same room with Midoriya. But that is there and isn't at all important for our discussion, so to speak. Nezu grinned and the tilting head of Midoriya gave him quite the rush. So, allow me to ask you this one thing, Midoriya. Have you ever thought of being a hero? A lot of times, actually. Now that was a surprise. Based on what he's wearing, the spots of grime on his armor, the various dents and cracks, and even the lack of luster, it was clear that what shielded him from the elements were under light maintenance, if it ever was maintained at all. Something a hero would never dare drop to. Sadly, the world decided I was never meant to be a hero and offed me before I could even try. The vitriol that escaped his lips was second to the implication that the man before him had indeed been killed. That didn't explain how he was walking well and looking alive much more than the symbol of peace who had most of his organs removed because of the fight years ago. So, you really are the one that died to the sludge villain. Izuku's glare sharpened, before he nodded his head. Well, that is quite the revelation. Are you aware of what happened to your murderer? Nope, but I sure wouldn't mind skewering him myself. Izuku growled, hand rubbing the bottom side of his chest. Make him understand the pain of how it felt to die. Now, Midoriya. As much as you are justified for wanting revenge against your killer, that would be less than ideal for a man such as yourself who is already in hot water with the authorities. Nezu's words caused Midoriya to react poorly. Is that a threat? Nezu felt the table shudder at the weight that was pressing down on it, but he didn't let that perturb him. No, but a fact. From what we heard with your talk with the detective, your goal of meeting your mother would be hard-pressed to be approved if you showed signs of bloodlust. Nezu waved his paw around. Believe it or not, I am here to help you. My thanks for getting my students and employee out of harm's way. However, I would need your undue cooperation for you to leave this all behind without legal ramifications. So, what do you want me to do? Nezu blinked. He didn't expect the man to agree at once without even a hint of protest. The more he interacted with this man, the more his curiosity began to grow. Oh, nothing too harsh. Just answering a few questions, a bit of a demonstration of your capabilities, and possibly a teaching role in my school. Now it was Midoriya's turn to blink. Oh, How he loved messing with the minds of humans. It was just so much fun. Nezu was also sure that outside of this room, both All Might and Tsukauchi had their mouths agape. As if they could even veto his decisions. No matter how unorthodox, everything was for the greater good of humanity. Something humans didn't want to do themselves. So, why not an animal do it then? Become the puppeteer controlling the actors from behind the curtain to ensure that humanity doesn't implode in and on itself. Teacher, you want me to teach your students? Midoriya hummed, quite possibly a sign that the man was thinking deeply on it. A trait Nezu really appreciated. Nowadays, only Aizawa was the one that thought hard about his decisions. It would be a nice change of pace for another one to pop up. Who knows, it might even be fun butting heads with each other in intellectual battles. Indeed, normally, I wouldn't offer such a delicate spot to one unknown, much more so if they aren't registered heroes. Nezu grinned with his beady eyes focused on Midoriya's. You, however, are a special case. I won't go into the nitty-gritty now, but trust me when I say I have your best interests at heart. How do I know you aren't lying? Ah, such a wonderful specimen. This truly was the greatest gift he had received this day. The HPSC must never get a hold of him. You don't, but as a token of my gratitude. Nezu's voice went down an octave, knowing how hard it was to relay this kind of information to Midoriya. I can give you the permission to meet your mother. Hook, line, and sinker. Sadly, what comes next might be truly devastating for the man. He hated this part of harrowing, and most, if not all heroes around the world shared the sentiment. Izuku got out of the car with Nezu riding atop his shoulders. Behind him followed All Might in his deflated form with Detective Tsukauchi slowly getting out of the driver's seat. He couldn't help but feel his heart beating within his chest, a wide grin plastered on his face as he thought of seeing the person he held dear to his heart. But that grin faded away when he saw where they were. Looking at the arc with a sign at the top, his heart skipped a beat. Slowly, the group proceeded forward, with Izuku dragging his feet as his heart continued to tighten. The further in they went, the more Izuku felt it harder to breathe. He could feel the stares coming from the group. The pity, concern, and most of all, sympathy. It was never easy losing someone you loved. And once they stopped in front of a grave, Izuku knew what it felt to truly break. Dropping to his knees, tears cascaded down his cheeks as gasps of air escaped his lungs. Inching forward, he laid his hand on the smooth stone, the grave well cared for and maintained. His other hand stroked the writings on the tombstone, each character making his hand go numb. Midoriya Inko, that was the name that was written on the tombstone. The name of his mother who he never managed to say goodbye to, or even thank her for everything she had done for him. And now he wouldn't be able to. His gasps slowly turned to chuckles, voice raspy and hoarse. A small grin floated up his face as he thought of everything that had happened to him. His death, his sudden transportation to the lands between, his struggles, more deaths, his triumphs, all of those, it didn't compare to the void that formed inside his chest when he saw the name on the tombstone. Why did it always happen to him? Why did the world make him life's punching bag? Was it because he dreamed too big? Was it because he stepped on someone else's toes? Was it just because he was born? Forehead impacting the tombstone, he wrapped his arms around the stone and wept, all the while those behind him continued to watch him grieve. This continued for a time, seconds stretching into minutes, and minutes stretching into an hour. A pat on his shoulder caused him to jerk, and he twisted his head like a rabid animal, mouth turned into a menacing growl. My boy, I know how it feels to lose a loved one. All Might kneeled beside him, blue eyes locked onto the tombstone before him. It never gets easier, holding the grief inside. But your mother wouldn't want to see you like this. Izuku's didn't let go of his frown, but he did manage to turn his sights back onto the grave. Tracing the characters on the tombstone, he felt himself choke on his saliva. How did she die? Izuku didn't like the sound of his voice. It felt raspy, frail. Suicide. Izuku felt a punch in his gut. She mourned for you, you know. I was there at your funeral. I saw what she looked like. Months after your burial, she. Even with All Might's voice trailing off, Izuku knew what he was about to say. So, in the end, it was still his fault. His fault that he died. His fault that Katsuki continued to bully him. His fault that she died. Always. It was his goddamned fault. Maybe Katsuki was right. Maybe he was just a fucking Deku. Midoriya, look at me. Please. Izuku didn't respond, the words entering one of his ears and exiting out the other. Midoriya, please look at me. When he didn't respond again, he felt a hand on his head. Twisting his head to the side, his eyes gazed into piercing, blue orbs. Midoriya, I know what you feel right now. I know it all too well. All Might lowered his head. This was a mistake that would haunt me until the day I die. I do not deserve your forgiveness, nor your sympathy, but please, think of your mother's wishes. What would she want you to do when she's gone? All Might's words caused Izuku to dig deep within his mind. The memories of the past that blurred together like an abstract painting coalesced and made it hard to distinguish one from another. But one was clear, clearer than anything in that amalgamation of pictures, colors, and static. A computer, a video, his mother walking in with a tray of food. A smile, her smile. You can be a great hero. Even after all this time, he never forgot that moment. He could recall it with perfect clarity. The time where everything was simple, where everything wasn't a fucked up cauldron of bad luck and malice. So, he vowed, he would become a great hero. If not for himself, then for his mother who believed in him when he was younger, so that when they meet again, he can finally say he became a great hero. Izuku leaned his back against the sturdy metal chair, his eyes focused on nothing as his mind circled around the revelations earlier in the day. His mother was dead. Midoriya Inko was dead. Suicide, they said, because she couldn't bear living without him. She was also struggling, what with his father leaving her during his early years, but there was always one constant that made her stay to look forward. Him. And he left just as abruptly as his father did when he went to get the milk down the road. It was surreal. Here he thought he would be able to reunite with his mother after months of hell, and life decided that it wasn't meant to be. Sometimes, he wondered if something from the far beyond hated him with a passion. A chuckle escaped his lips as he rubbed his tired eyes. No, he wouldn't succumb to atrophy. His mother believed he could be a hero. He'll show her he can be a hero. He'll show them all. The light bulb hanging from the ceiling wobbled slightly, the force causing it to swing like a pendulum. Izuku raised his eyebrows when he felt the table tremble for a bit, but even after minutes had passed, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. So, he waited, eyes darting around the room to look for anything remotely interesting to soothe his understimulated brain. His ass was beginning to chafe from all the sitting before the door to the room opened, revealing a police officer that had a cat head. And no, Izuku didn't mean a cat-like head. The officer literally had a cat's head. Come along now, Midoriya Izuku. The cat officer gestured towards the door to which Izuku raised his shackled arms. The officer wasn't even fazed at the action and instead headed directly towards Izuku before he procured a key from his person. A quick insert into the locked cuffs and Izuku was free once more. You are hereby cleared of all the murder charges after a significant amount of investigation. However, the HPSC has hereby decreed that your vigilantism must be punished and as such, has assigned an agent to be your handler for your rehabilitation. If Izuku wasn't a smart enough person, he would have never thought that the officer was just spouting lines from a predetermined script that was probably written by the many lawyers in Japan. That said, he was grateful for the fact that he was no longer considered a murderer. It was idiotic to even suggest that the person who saved children from villains by killing them was a murderer, but he was a bit miffed because he was officially a vigilante. Not like it was that much of a bad thing. Sure, vigilantes were looked down upon because they weren't handled by the government, but at least they weren't villains, except for the vigilantes that become villains. Those are the people he would gladly skewer with all strike if they even dared to kill him. Not before he gave them a chance to run, though. Following the officer, Izuku was greeted by the many eyes in the precinct, officers on duty milling about doing their jobs. They weren't surprised by him passing by, and the eyes that glared at him made him guess that he wasn't the most well-liked person in the building currently. It took a few minutes of navigating the corridors in pure silence before Izuku and the cat officer were standing just in front of the main door to the building, with Tsukauchi talking with Nezu and All Might still in his deflated form waiting for the two to finish their talk. But Principal Nezu, wouldn't the HPS? The rat's beady eyes narrowed at the detective and Tsukauchi clamped his mouth shut. Hell, even the other police officers who managed to see the exchange turned away and walked like nothing was happening. And I'm telling you now that an agent from their main office isn't necessary. Surely, a man of their stature must be busy day in and day out managing most of the heroes registered in Japan. Nezu's snout quirked into something resembling a grin, before his beady eyes focused on Izuku who had just arrived. And, for the record, Midoriya Izuku here had just accepted his new role in our prestigious academy, isn't that right? Something told him that should he refuse Nezu right now, hell would come later. So, without even a hint of hesitation, Izuku nodded at the principal's words with a tight smile. See, I even have all the required documents if you need more proof. Nezu lifted a briefcase, which Izuku just noticed was hanging from one of his paws, and opened them with a click, revealing a bunch of papers that he didn't want to see anymore due to how many they were. And as a bonus, the graduating students will have some knowledge on how vigilantes operate in case they run into them, thanks to Midoriya here sharing his experiences. A quick look to Tsukauchi had Izuku tilting his head. The detective looked like he was on his way to the gallows, what with the long face and eyebags. Glancing at his side, he saw the cat officer even cringing at the sight. Good to know he wasn't the only one. All right, you've made your point. Just. Tsukauchi released a sigh before he grabbed the cup of coffee that was on a nearby table. Just make sure no more incidents occur, otherwise the HPSC will deem your school unfit to rehabilitate vigilantes. His piece said. Tsukauchi left, but not before gesturing towards the cat officer beside him. With a nod towards the rat principal, the cat officer followed Tsukauchi like a lost stray, kind of funny seeing that he literally was a humanoid cat. Midoriya, follow us. And quickly please, we haven't got all day. Nezu closed shut the briefcase full of papers and hefted it off to All Might, who accepted it. Seeing no reason to refuse, Izuku followed the two into a pickup truck parked neatly into a parking space. A far cry from the black car they used when they headed to the cemetery earlier in the day to visit his mother's grave. Izuku's chest ached a bit at the memory. Midoriya, hurry up. The tone that left Nezu's mouth slapped Izuku out of his thoughts and he quickly hopped into the backseat. Despite how it looked, both outside and inside, it was surprisingly comfortable. All Might, because who else would be able to drive this thing among the three, inserted the keys and started the engine. It roared to life like an angry god, Nezu and Izuku frowning at the noise. All Might, remind me again, how old is this thing? The gaunt blonde rubbed the back of his head at the question. 2.5 decades. Even Izuku had to blink at that. This pickup truck was that ancient. As far removed as he was from Japan at this moment, even he knew the lifespans of most cars nowadays weren't able to go above 15. I see, would you want a replacement? Nezu's question caused All Might to visibly glower. I'm afraid I would have to turn down your generosity, Principal Nezu. The air inside the vehicle grew heavy and Izuku blinked again. I'm sure you can understand. ... As you wish. Nezu clamped his mouth shut as the truck's engine roared once more before they were strolling through the city. With the air sour and tense, nobody in the truck was too keen to make some small talk. By the way, Midoriya, my thanks for going along with the impromptu act in the precinct. Nezu looked back at the backseat, Izuku still quiet as he regarded Nezu with thinly veiled curiosity, wariness. But not to worry, the papers I have on my person are legitimate. All I need are your signatures and you will be incorporated into my school as one of the assistant teachers. A question. Nezu waved his paw, probably the signal to continue. Why do you want me in your school so badly? Well, from what I've seen with your combat accolades during the USJ, your emotional stability in the cemetery, and All Might vouching for you, I can proudly say you would fit right in with the rest of the staff. Nezu's grin stretched from ear to ear. Provided you can get along with them in the first place, but I doubt you would have that much of a problem with them. Still, I'm confused. Izuku frowned as he narrowed his eyes at the rat. Why go to all these lengths just to get me this early? You could have gotten me if you just scheduled with the HPSC for me to teach if really needed. Ah, but that's where things get a bit more complicated. Nezu's grin turned into a frown, all the while All Might focused on the road. It is an open secret that I despise the HPSC, more specifically, their policies. I'm sure you're aware of how the masses view the hero society. Izuku tilted his head again. This was a surprise, knowing that the principal of the most prestigious hero school in Japan disliked the current status quo. He hummed, trying to figure out why the rat hated the HPSC, and even after a few more minutes of thinking, he came up with nothing. Maybe he should have strengthened his intelligence with runes more. Well, it is quite simple, really. Nezu returned to making himself comfortable in his seat. Hero society as we know it, is slowly collapsing in itself. Izuku blinked again. What did Nezu mean by that? Looking out of the window, everything seemed fine to him. Buildings were still pristine, everybody was milling about with smiles on their faces, and things were generally not looking like the lands between. He was also pretty biased with the hero culture, what with him being a hero fanboy. He may have lost some respect with All Might, but that didn't mean he hated all heroes now. You won't be seeing the signs now. It just started during the rise of All Might, after all. Nezu's chuckle grew a bit despondent. We won't be alive to see the fall, decades, even centuries from now. It's a funny thing, really. The symbol of peace is ultimately the main reason why humanity's collapse is all but guaranteed. Looking at All Might, Izuku could see that even the gaunt blonde agreed with the rat's conclusion. Question is, why? Why is he one of the main reasons humanity would fall in the future? I can imagine your mind turning around and around. Nezu's chuckled a bit more. Another simple answer to a complex question. Heroes are just human. They cannot be in every place at the same time. But seeing how our society is, you can imagine why it is such a dangerous status quo. Once Nezu said his piece, Izuku clicked the puzzle in place. The heroes cannot save everyone, and those that slip through the cracks grew disillusioned. Villains are made, not born. Who knows, maybe some of them aspired to be heroes in the past, but life kicked them down and they turned villain instead. Some became villains out of spite, but others became villains just because they thought there was no other way to survive. That's not even including the fact that different kinds of quirks are being discriminated against, and take a gander as to what kind of quirks are mostly given the spotlight. Izuku clicked his tongue. Of course, it just had to be like that. Mutation quirks were always looked down upon because they changed how a person looked. It was odd that different kinds of quirks gave rise to different kinds of reactions. Was it the influence of heroes in the higher ranking having flashy quirks that were marketable? Was it because of that most of the people thought that quirks that differed from the norm being the top ranks of the Japanese hero system, were villainous? Enough said about the quirkless. They were treated like a subhuman at best. But wait, that doesn't explain why you think All Might is the reason why everything will collapse. Izuku questioned the rat, and Nezu's grin told him that he barely scratched the surface of the rat's thoughts. How astute of you, Midoriya. I knew I had a reason to like you. The rat's scarred beady right eye bore into his. The reason why I mentioned All Might as the reason, is because he is the pillar holding up the current hero society. What would happen if it broke? Plus, everything would come crashing down. Ah, we've arrived, Nezu chirped as the truck slowly ground to a halt. The handbrake clicked and All Might unstrapped his seatbelt. Nezu, being the tiny animal that he was, wasn't able to use the seatbelt. Come along now, Midoriya, your new home awaits. And wasn't that something that made Izuku cringe? A new home. He hadn't had a home ever since he was sent into the lands between. Opening the door of the truck, he stepped out with nary a pep in his step. He still wasn't comfortable agreeing with Nezu, what with his duties in the lands between still a work in progress, but since there wasn't any kind of way for him to go back yet, he might as well take a load off. He deserved it after all he's been through. That, and he still needed to mess with Katsuki some more. What else was he supposed to do here? Learning normal things here after what he'd seen in the lands between just seemed like a total bore. Hero laws. What use is that in an anarchic region full of monsters that had it out for you? Now that was a thought. Nezu wanted him to teach, right? How about a crash course in trying to survive the unexpected? Gods know that the heroes in Japan needs it, what with the villains still somehow running rampant around the country. Maybe Nezu had a point. If Izuku could still see villains running amok, especially if what happened in the USJ was an indication, what would happen if All Might, the main reason why crime rate was at an all-time low, disappears? Chaos. Absolute chaos. No wonder Nezu hated the HPSC. What they're doing is making heroes marketable, making them a commodity. They glamorized the hero life to get even more applicants, to inspire more to become heroes with the wrong ideals. Now in a superpowered society, it had some merits, but in the long term, it would destabilize or even cripple the entirety of society. And if the paper he had read before he got sent into the lands between was real, then quirks were just going to get stronger and stronger as the generations continue. With those in mind, it was quite mind-boggling why this kind of practice was still ongoing. In the dark age of quirks, it was a nice band-aid solution to a fucked-up world, but in peaceful times with most of society stabilized, it needed to change. Why? One of the effects of this society was present now. The bystander effect. It was already present in the past before the age of quirks, but now it is rampant everywhere. The mentality that a hero will take care of it is too problematic. It just isn't sustainable if a much larger crisis that can affect cities prop up because villains are unpredictable. Sighing, Izuku followed All Might and the rat into the school, the giant UA logo hanging above the front doors leading to the inner hallways clearly seen from the front gates. Now, Midoriya, before we head in, I would like to remind you that since you are currently homeless, Izuku winced again, still reeling from the revelation that his mother was dead. I and the staff have prepared for you a temporary living space. At least until you can afford your own with the pay you will be receiving with your new job. Wait, I'm getting paid. Izuku tilted his head. Why? Of course, Midoriya. Nezu looked back at him as he hopped on All Might's shoulder. A simple transaction of give and take. You give my students some needed lessons, I give you the funds to enjoy your life. What about all the legal things? Izuku questioned the rat, but only got twinkling beady eyes in response. Oh, no worries about that, my dear employee. Leave it to your intellectual superior. Izuku will not lie. That part about the intellectual superior grated on him, but then again, Nezu was an animal with a hyper-intelligence quirk. Of course he isn't going to compete with that, unless he strengthened his mind with runes. Not that he will, because for one, it will slow down his growth for the dragon incantations, and two, it was a waste of runes when he didn't really have any interest in glintstone sorceries in the first place. It was hard trying not to be a murder hobo when everything that moves gave runes when killed. That said, please head to the teacher's lounge while me and All Might scurry along to my office. Nezu grinned as he patted the gaunt blonde's hair. We still have some papers to sign and documents to stamp, so we'll be late for your so-called indoctrination. Indoctrination? Izuku once more questioned the rat, but all he got was a brief cackle before All Might started walking away. Squinting at the man, he noticed that All Might's eyes reluctantly left him, but he could see the emotion hiding underneath. Guilt and shame. At least the man was trying hard to repent for his mistakes, not that it gave Izuku any amount of relief. It was him, after all, that died during that altercation. Shaking his head from the depressing thoughts, Izuku tried to navigate the empty halls of the school. From what he heard from the rat indicated that the entire school was out for a week because of the invasion. Something along the lines of giving the students a break from the harrowing incident, as well as beef up security. They better be, remembering how easy it was sneaking into Stormvale Castle. Granted, the damn thing was already crumbling due to the war and the lack of manpower was concerning. The corpse underneath the castle might have something to do with it. He shivered, just remembering the giant thing was giving him cold feet. Rogier said that the corpse was King Godwin's after he was killed during the Night of Black Knives. Now wasn't that scary? A literal divine being, killed in his own home. Just the thought of it made his heart beat faster. If that could happen, then what does that mean for the rest? Sure, he was able to slay Godric the Grafted, but he was a demigod. Not a true deity above mortals. He was also the weakest, if his sources were correct. Will he have to kill a god? After all, even with all his trekking through Limgrave and Liurnia, he still had not a fucking clue on what an Elden Lord is. Melina said it was to be unite the Elden Ring and bring order to the lands, but from what he saw, it was a source of unimaginable power. Power strong enough to shape the entire region to one as he sees fit. Nobody would be able to contest him, or even dare challenge him. And this tarnished business, why them? Why him? He could see grace, guiding him to his objectives, but what about the others? Why did Rogier say he couldn't see them anymore? Did it just happen normally? Or was there a reason for it? Even Ver said something along the lines of most Tarnished who follow the guidance of grace find themselves dead because it was their fate to begin with. It was confusing. Sighing again, Izuku dropped that line of thought. Think about that later, focus on the now. While he's here, he might as well unwind all of the stress that nearly made him jump off a ledge in the lands between. Not that it would do him any good, seeing that he would revive a time later. Wait a minute. He saw Rogier die with a bloodstain underneath Stormvale Castle. But when he went to the Round Table hold, he was fine. Well, relatively fine, but there was one thing that rang in his mind. He said that he lost the guidance of grace. He implied that it happened after he died underneath the castle. Normally, a Tarnished like him would be back to full health if they died, but Rogier didn't get better. Does losing the guidance of grace somehow make a Tarnished mortal once more? Will a guideless Tarnished breath there last when slain? Not for the first time in the day, Izuku shivered once more. That was a line of thought he didn't want to dig deep into. As long as he had Melina and he still had the guidance of grace, he will be fine. He hoped. Izuku didn't know whether his body would break first, or his mind. Now wasn't this a surprise? Truth be told, Nimari was a bit off-put by their principal doing insane shit again, but it's not like she could just complain to the rat. The last time she did that, she had to get away from the press that seemed hellbent on trying to interview her for some reason. Beside her, Yamada was hanging banners on the posts and wearing a party hat on his head. Meanwhile Ishiyama, the lovable blockhead that he was making sculptures as stone sculptures as gifts. She had a collection of sculptures from him that showcased the entirety of the UA Hero teachers, and she had it proudly displayed in her house's living room. Khan was also hanging banners but on the opposite side of Yamada, while Snipe, not a single teacher knew the man's name, other than Nezu, was busy setting up the cake. Who knew the cowboy could bake a mean chocolate cake? Kuros was still in the along with Aizawa, who had it even more badly than what happened to the space-themed hero. She didn't know how or why, but apparently, broken bones, decaying skin and flesh, as well as ruptured organs were somehow worse than literal disintegration. Quirks or bullshit. She had to give her thanks to the knight. That wasn't a villain, as was concluded by the authorities, just a misguided vigilante, for stabilizing them with the glowing rock. She was also confused on that part, but she just chalked it up to quirks and their bullshittery. Just look at Ishiyama, he's a literal moving block of cement. Granted, he is a human, just with cement skin, cement flesh, cement muscles, you get the idea. While all that was happening, Nimari was also busy making sure the food was presentable. They didn't know whether the knight was a foodie or whatnot, but overkill was better than under. At least the soup kitchen not far from here will be eating like kings if they didn't finish all of the food. Can't waste good meals, after all. As the silent preparation continued, the door opened and caught everyone's attention. Kayama's heart nearly stopped when she thought that the knight had arrived early, but thankfully, it was just ectoplasm. In the same vein with Snipe, nobody really knew his name other than Nezu, dragging along a Nui who had dropped the muzzle for the party. We're not late, Ectoplasm's voice warbled across the room. Nope, almost done setting all of this up. Nimari smiled as she made the finished touches of the displayed food. Plates were all stacked up on one side with the utensils lying cleanly next to them. There, how about on your end, Yamada? Yo, done and done. The DJ hero was as excitable as always. Khan, meanwhile, was just glad that he was done hanging the banners. Where's our special guest at? Rat still giving him the tour. The grin on his face was infectious, something that she appreciated even back in the day when they were still students. Grr, I smell him down the hall. Can't mistake the scent of rusting metal. Anui closed the door and took a seat. I can even smell the blood from here. No offense, Khan, none taken. The blood-themed hero just grunted as he took a seat as well, his crimson costume contrasting the white-colored sofas. An all too common result of fighting against regenerators. Ishiyama sighed as he sat upon another sofa as well. Remind me to let him know to clean his armor. Nimari cringed. She knew how strong Anui's sense of smell is, making it a bit of a downer on the therapy dog in human form. Yes, she considers Anui a therapy dog, Otherwise, why would he be the guidance counselor of the entire school where heroes were being trained? A hero and trauma go hand in hand, after all. The sound of metallic footsteps echoed from beyond the door, and Nimari was quick to plaster on a smile. A knock on the door, followed by the twisting knob, sent her excitement to new heights. And when it opened, "Welcome to UA High School," the cast of teachers greeted with open arms, but Nimari saw something else. She saw a young man who looked so goddamn delicious. Izuku blinked, not really expecting a surprise party, what with Nezu saying something along the lines of an indoctrination. At best, he thought of this being some sort of ritual where he was asked a bunch of questions non-stop until the rest of the staff were satisfied. At worst, well, they are professional heroes. Are there even any worse possibilities? Well, don't just stand there, special guest. Come on in. Present Mike. He remembered due to the costume he wore. That, and how he ruptured a lot of villains' eardrums during the USJ, greeted with a massive grin on his face. A stark contrast to the judgmental gaze coming from one red-clad hero with tubes of blood on his back. The rest of the staff stood there patiently, waiting for him to enter the room. He spotted a cowboy, a block of cement, a guy with big teeth, man with a dog's snout, and a mature woman, along with both Present Mike and the Blood Hero. A colorful and unique cast of characters, if he was being honest. Stepping foot inside the room, Izuku didn't really make any kind of facial expression, treating this like it was another encounter not unlike in the lands between. The number of times he was caught off guard while exploring the damn continent was too many to count, resulting in either horrifying deaths or amusing scenarios. Take that giant warrior jar for instance. Alexander was his name, if Izuku recalled correctly. He wasn't winning any strongest jar in the world title as he was now, but his optimism was too contagious. He couldn't help but smile every time he remembered the lovable giant oaf. Well then, since none of my colleagues are introducing themselves first, allow me go on ahead. Ladies first and all. The mature woman winked at Izuku, causing the teen who looked more like a young adult tilt his head. Kayama Nimari, professional hero named Midnight. Pleasure to meet you. You, Yamada Hazashi in the house. Present Mike on broadcast during the weekends. Present Mike pulled down his shades as he let Izuku glimpse the colors of his eyes for a single moment. Nice to meet ya, couldn't you be any less of a loudmouth? The block of cement palmed his face before giving Izuku was kind wave. Greetings. My name is Ishiyama Ken, hero named Smentos. A wonderful day to meet you, Midoriya Izuku. Howdy partner, just call me Snipe. Cowboy tipped his hat to him and Izuku nodded his head along. He knew a gesture of respect when he saw one. As for how, his various experiences with random invasions were enough of a reminder. He never really did figure out why most of them liked squatting on his dead corpse and standing up, only to repeat them until they fade into motes of light. It was a confusing gesture, one that he still had no idea how and why it existed. Kon Sekijiro, Vlad King, the hero with blood tubes on his back grunted. Not really much for conversation, Izuku mused. Ectoplasm. Teeth hero nodded, to which Izuku nodded in return. I teach math. Izuku had no idea how to respond to that. Anui Ryo, hero name Hound Dog. The hound-looking hero nearly made Izuku revert back to base instincts whenever a canine came near him. Damn those dogs, giving him PTSD every second of the day. Guidance counselor of the school. And wasn't that a surprise? A man with a dog-related quirk, judging by his snout with a dog-related name, and a dog-related costume as seen by the hanging muzzle on his waist, was the guidance counselor of the school. Maybe fate had a sense of humor after all, seeing that a literal therapy dog was counseling the entirety of the student body. Now that it was his turn to introduce himself, Izuku bowed regally, like that one invader in the roundtable hold. He didn't know why he defaulted to the gesture, but at this point, it was just a habit whenever an invader comes along. Midoriya Izuku. His armor clanked as he bowed, not really suitable for the gesture he was doing. Assistant teacher. I'll have to ask Nezu for more information about what role I'll be playing in his school. Fair enough. Midnight shrugged, the mature woman's grin returning as she slowly walked towards him. Now then, the grin on her face was all it took for Izuku to step back and nearly swing open the door. No way in hell was he dealing with that woman. No, never in his life had he ever felt the danger to his chastity, something he was keen on preserving, for some reason. But before he went the nuclear route and run for the hills, a statement. "I'm a minor, by the way." The words that exited his mouth managed to freeze Midnight in place, her grin slowly slipping away as it turned into a cringe. Wah. A pat on her back cut her off, Present Mike shaking his head with a disappointed frown. "Nemery, I know you like them young, but for the love of all that is holy, don't simp for the underage dude." The DJ hero glared at him, his brows furrowed. "Even if he looks like someone in his mid-20s. If you need proof, you can just ask Nezu." Izuku shrugged, seeing no more point in trying to get out of the room with the obviously thirsty woman. "No, Cougar. Anyway, is that food?" He pointed at the different assorted pieces of food neatly laid on the table, some of them looking too good to pass off. The last time he had something to eat was with the man that sold cooked lobsters. Eating fruits and cooked meat from dogs and other animals that roamed the plains with no spices became tiring once he had his fill of eating them every single day. "Yes it is, partner. Care to partake?" The cowboy gestured for the obvious buffet and Izuku didn't hesitate to grab a chicken leg. Biting off a chunk of flesh, Izuku nearly shed a tear. God, how long has it been since he's eaten properly cooked food? He didn't care that he was making mess. He didn't care that his metal gloves were being stained by the various sauces that coated the delicious food. Who knows, it might be the last time he would be able to taste them again. Might as well savor the moment. Geez, someone's hungry. Present Mike patted his back, the light thump an unwelcome gesture as he glared at the excitable blonde. "Save some for us, will ya? I know this is for you, but holy are you going it like a man possessed?" Izuku stopped then looked down on his hands. His heart thumped and he nearly shied away from the buffet, but then he reminded himself that he didn't know when would be the last time he would be able to eat like this, so screw his embarrassment. That said, it would be a bit selfish of him to be hogging all the food, so he stepped aside and made enough room for the rest of the heroes to partake as well. They grabbed plates and utensils, Izuku blinking as he facepalmed, coating his face with the various sticky substances that made the food good. Of all the things he had to forget, using a plate was one of them. How the hell did that happen? He was sure that there were a bunch of plates when he scoured Stormvale Castle. Then again, he never used a plate ever since he got transported to the lands between. Also, his memories have been getting spotty the more he died, but nothing important was lost. Maybe. Shaking his head, Izuku moved to get a plate but one was handed to him by Midnight, who was looking a bit sheepish now. "First off, I didn't know you were a minor." Midnight rattled off like a trembling fawn. "Second, how did Nezu get the green light for you being an assistant teacher if you were a minor?" "Don't ask." Vlad King was the one who responded, his hands picking through some protein-rich food as he stuffed them on his plate. "It's Nezu." Point taken. Midnight grumbled once more and continued putting more and more food onto her plate. "Careful there, Nems. I know how much you care about your waistline." Present Mike's grin wilted away as the mature woman sent him a demonic glare so malicious, it could freeze hell over. "Shutting up now. Hey, that'll teach ya to run her mouth." Snipe commented as he detached the lower part of his mask to eat his own portion made mostly out of vegetables. My legs are killing me." Ectoplasm sat down on the couch before his hands parted the trench coat hiding the bottom half of his body, revealing his specially made prosthetic legs. "Too bad Maijima isn't here, could have helped me with the maintenance." "Where is he anyway?" Vlad King questioned as he sat on a nearby sofa. "Something about a pink-haired menace that won't leave the lab." Present Mike shrugged as he stuffed himself full of pasta. "Yeah, I can see that." Midnight cringed as she slowly devoured more protein than even Vlad King had on his plate. Kid's a smart cookie, but a bit too focused at times. As the room devolved into idle chatter, Izuku observed everybody silently from the corner of the room. If anything, at least his stay here would prove a bit amusing, if not for the possible interactions with Katsuki, but the shenanigans he could pull via teaching the students. He wondered how Patches would feel himself being used as a test dummy. Nah, surely he won't mind. And if he did, he'd call that even for sending him straight into the ass of a giant runebeer. Well, Here is your temporary lodgings, at least until you could find yourself with a more permanent residence. Nezu, still riding on someone's shoulder but this time delegated to a stone-faced Midnight, chirped with a paw waving around the air. I know it isn't much, but this was provided without due notice. I hope you'll give your thanks to Smintos if you see him, seeing as he was the one who made this entire structure for you. Izuku hummed, looking over the entire house with his eyes. It wasn't anything mind-boggling, those belonged to the architecture found in the lands between, but overall, it served its purpose. 2 stories, and walled with thick concrete painted a light gray, a sturdy wooden oak door, and a welcome mat underneath the porch. Heading inside, Izuku hummed some more as he inspected every inch of the house. There was a kitchen, living room, bathroom, and a dining room on the first floor, and 3 bedrooms plus a master bedroom on the second floor. There was also a basement, but Izuku didn't go down there yet in favor of seeing Nezu off with Midnight still like a stone statue. For some reason, every time Nezu rode on one of the staff's shoulders, they became quiet golems, not wanting to talk unless spoken to. It even happened to All Might, albeit in his shriveled form, but the idea was there. Were they really that afraid of a small rat? Then again, he is probably the smartest being in the entire planet thanks to his almost bullshit quirk. Anyway, with them gone, it was time to check the basement. Heading down the concrete steps, Izuku flicked open the switch and light illuminated the previously dark room. There were a bunch of shelves, all of them empty since there was nothing to even store yet, but maybe during his travels, he could store the gear here instead of his bottomless box if ever Patches were to steal it. After all, how could the bald man steal it when he's in another world? Semantics. That said, where is Zweihander? Nezu said that he placed it in the basement after he got custody of it from the police. He made sure the blade was well maintained because he treated it as his lover. There was also the other reason that Hugh would strangle him with his chains if he ever managed to destroy something he's been reforging with the smithing stones Izuku delivered. And then, he saw it. Eyes widening, he felt the warmth emanating from one corner of the basement, his skin tingling as he drew ever closer. His feet carried him closer to the heat, and once close, his mouth hung open, before it turned into a smile. No longer was he lost, for the guidance of grace had found him again. Izuku hovered his palm over the site of grace, the warmth emanating from the mote of light tingling his skin. That being said, he was confused as to how he could see it here, in Japan of all places. Was there something he was missing? Did the Greater Will's influence actually reach Earth? Or was it here because he, as a Tarnished blessed with the Greater Will's grace, granted sight of the world he was in because of his mere existence? He still didn't know how it could affect the world, with him still being ignorant of the being, but since it was heralded as order, then it was good, right? After all, they wanted a Tarnished to unite the Elden Ring and restore order. So, going by that logic, the Greater Will is on the spectrum of good. Maybe. Izuku was still clueless, what with nobody sane enough in the lands between giving him a concrete answer. Sighing, Izuku slowly knelt before Grace and moved to seat himself comfortable on the concrete ground. Eyes gazing directly into the warm light, he felt his core be at peace as the soothing atmosphere calmed his nerves. Inhaling and exhaling deeply, he closed his eyes and let his body rest. Strange. The land here is. Izuku's eyes opened wide when he heard that oh-so-familiar voice. Slowly turning his neck, he watched as Melina knelt beside him, her eyes focused on only his. This is where you came from. I must admit, it is quite different. Melina. Izuku's voice lowered slightly, a soft tone echoing through the basement. How are you here? I am bound to you, my companion. Until our accord is fulfilled. Melina averted her gaze to take in the empty surroundings. But it is confusing, and heartwarming, seeing this world having a semblance of order. Hey, if you listen to Nezu, then you would change your mind. Izuku looked back at the grace floating above the floor. Everything here in this world is just one bad day away from total anarchy. I guess this is what happens when most of the entire population has power unique to only them. Melina didn't respond, causing Izuku to look back at her once more. You've changed, once again. Melina's slightly monotone voice grew a tad emotional. It is good to see you like this. Enjoying what you have in the moment. Well, let's just say that I had an eye-opening meeting with my mother. Izuku's tried to plaster a smile on his face, but only made it look brittle. If Melina noticed it or not, she didn't let him know. I see. Melina's voice trailed off as the two sunk into silence, a common thing that happens during Izuku's journey. Shall I turn your runes into strength? Yes please. Izuku crawled over, arms outstretched as Melina offered hers. Let my hand rest upon you, for but a moment. She spouted the same lines. At first, Izuku thought he would be annoyed after the 5th or 6th time, but no. Instead, he grew used to it, he even looked forward to it. There was just something soothing with Melina's voice that Izuku's muscles continued to relax as the runes swirled inside him. Share them with me, your thoughts, your ambitions, the principles you would follow. A vision of a dragon, soaring high in the skies as it laid waste upon its adversaries. A vision of the past, of his mother welcoming him from school with a smile after a rather brutal beating from his former friend. A vision of a throne, one cracked and broken as it remained empty. A vision of him seating upon the empty throne, now polished with hints of gold. Izuku's eyes snapped open, his muscles surging with newfound strength. There was even something within him that stirred, like a suppressed gout of fire, just waiting to be unleashed upon his foes. It is done. Melina exhaled, her spectral body not looking any worse for wear, unlike Izuku who had sweated for the whole duration. Thanks. And Izuku meant that one word from the bottom of his heart. Without Melina, he was sure he would have dropped dead the moment he entered Stormvale Castle. Think nothing of it. Our accord is still unfulfilled, and as such, I shall act as your maiden, converting your rune fragments into strength. Even with her excuses, Izuku could sense that Melina was someone who cherished little moments like this. After all, it was unhealthy to doggedly pursue a goal without rest. You like me anyway. Izuku grinned and Melina huffed. He didn't know how many times he tried to get a reaction from the normally expressionless maiden without any result, but damn him if he isn't going to try. It was just wrong seeing that face twisted in an expressionless mask every time they talked to one another. Anyway, I'm going to head up after I find all strike. Izuku slowly stood up from his spot, with Melina following suit. You're still going to haunt me like always, right? Once again, I am bound to you. I shall follow you wherever you go until you bring me to the foot of the Erd tree. The same explanation, the same excuse. It was sad to see, but there wasn't anything Izuku could do other than fulfill his side of the deal. Just don't peek while I change clothes. Melina's face remained expressionless. I'll get you one day, just you wait. Melina's spectral body vanished into motes of blue light, but before she did, Izuku managed to hear a small snort coming from the maiden. A smile floated up his face as he scoured through the basement to find all strike. Katsuki lay on his bed, eyes open wide as the darkness consumed the entire room. The sun had long set, and the old hag told him to get some rest after what had happened. But how was he supposed to fucking sleep? Every time he closed his eyes, all he could see was that infuriating grin on the person who he once bullied. Every time the noise died down, all he could hear was his nonchalant tone. So what if I did? His heart skipped a beat. There was no way that Izuku changed that much. There was just no way. How the fuck did a hero worshipper turn into that unfeeling murderer? Sweat pooled underneath his brow as he tossed and turned on his mattress, the once pristine sheets soaked with his perspiration. He did this for a few more times before his frustration reached its limits. Fuck this, he needed a cold shower. Grunting, Katsuki pushed himself off the bed and walked towards the door. The wooden door creaked open, the noise traveling through the dim hallways. It was past midnight, and the old hag and old man were already deep into their sleep. His feet on autopilot, he let it guide him towards his destination while he stewed in his mind, his thoughts a jumbled mess on what to think about what happened in the USJ. His feet stopped and his eyes glared at the door separating him from the bathroom, his mind grinding to a halt as he stood in the hallway silent as the grave. Reaching forward, his hand gripped on the knob, an act that normally didn't require much thinking, but here, he could feel the smooth texture of the knob, its cold metal surface sending shivers down his spine. Shaking his head, he twisted it to the side and the door clicked open. Pushing it gently awry, Katsuki flicked on the light switch located just right next to the open doorway. His eyes squinted, the sudden transition from dark to light stinging his eyes for a brief moment. Stepping inside and locking the door shut, Katsuki stripped down into his birthday suit and flung his clothes into a nearby bin. He headed for the shower and without hesitation, twisted open the valve and let loose the ice-cold water within. The cold water struck Katsuki's skin like a cascade of icy needles, each droplet delivering a sharp, stinging jolt that jarred his senses. The initial shock sent shivers crawling down his spine, mingling with the sweat that clung to his frame. His thoughts ground to a halt, the shivering cold enough of a damper to his inner turmoil. He focused on the cold and the sound of running water hitting the floor, hoping it would let him forget for even just a moment so he could collect himself. But the guilt ran deep. It never faded, even with distraction. That fateful reunion would never leave his mind. No, his subconscious would never dare forget even if he wanted to. It was his fucking fault why this happened in the first place. Fuck those that stroked his ego too much, it inflated to the size of Mt. Fuji. Fuck those that said he was a fucking shoe-in to become a hero because of his awesome quirk. Fuck those that thought quirks were everything. Fuck him for believing in his superiority that he bullied one of his only true friends for most of his entire life. His hand blurred, knuckles slamming against the wall. The concrete held firm, but the sound of its impact rippled throughout the room. Gritting his teeth, his fists clenched once more, his calloused palms pressuring the sides of his head as he tried to shoo the thoughts away. He wanted to scream, to shout, to rage against this world that put a barrier between him and Izuku, but that would be refusing to take responsibility for the shit he'd given to those downtrodden. No matter how many times those around him said it wasn't his fault for killing Izuku, in his heart he knew he was the murderer. He didn't let the tears fall. He sucked it back in, making sure it would remain within. He knew he would never be forgiven for his past wrongdoings. He knew it would hurt to carry this guilt until his grave. But it was his to carry. To try and redeem himself even if he didn't deserve it. If someone were to describe who Patches was, they would probably call him a backstabbing traitor that loved scamming a man off the rest of his wallet. That, and a love for kicking said man down a cliff if he were ever so inclined. And frankly, Patches would agree with the sentiment, if only because they were right. Those praising their faith in the gods. Growing, expanding, thinking themselves mighty and just. It sickened him. So here he squatted, alone, surviving. Eyes staring directly into a campfire as the crackles of embers entered his ears. He never did care for all the religious nonsense. After all, those in a position of power are bound to exploit those underneath. A chuckle escaped his lips. Religious fanatics. It's been a few months since the Tarnished came and visited. He was a bit annoyed now that one of his sources of runes just up and vanished after he went his way in this giant lake. But alas, such is the life of a Tarnished guided by grace like puppets on a string. Still, his eyes wandered in one direction every so often. That damsel camping out in one of the stone gazebos warranted his attention from time to time. After he sent that Tarnished her way, he managed to overhear what they talked about. Something about a lost pendant, but the kicker is that the Tarnished accepted her request to take it back. That said, the Tarnished did say before he returned the pendant, he would first be going around Liurnia, mapping his way across the giant lake. Rhea agreed, saying that she could wait, but the more time passed, the more she became antsy. What the hell happened to the Tarnished? Did he just leave her after accepting her request? If so, then he pegged him wrongly. As much as he liked messing with